Okay, it looks like we're good to go on Facebook, Diane.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. This is the, I don't even know what date it is, right? The July 28th meeting of the Cohasset Board of Selectmen, our Select Board. Tonight's meeting will be conducted on the Zoom platform and live streamed on Cohasset 143 TV, as well as Cohasset's Facebook page. The public is invited to participate on the Zoom platform, which can be accessed using the link provided at the top of the posted agenda on the town website. The Zoom app can be loaded onto a smartphone, laptop, tablet, or other computer. Please know that if you're watching on Facebook or on Cohasset 143 TV, you are not a participant or an attendee of the actual meeting. So if you make comments on Facebook, we will certainly see them after the fact. But if you have questions at times in the meeting where we're taking questions, please use the question and answer feature in Zoom. Members of the board and other scheduled participants will be able to participate when called on by the chair. Board members will be able to ask questions of any participant. Votes taken at this meeting will be by roll call. Members of the public who wish to ask questions, just reiterating what I just said, are asked to utilize the question and answer feature on Zoom, including, and this is important, typing in their name and address for the public record. The chair, and I'm going to ask Carrie, the vice chair, to help me out, will review questions as they come in and direct them to the appropriate participant for response. This meeting is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on Cohasset 143 TV. Our first order of business is to invite everybody to participate in the Pledge of Allegiance. And I'm going to get a flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next on our agenda is any member of the public who would like to ask a question on an item that is not on the agenda. If you could type in your name, address, question, and answer. We'll give it a few minutes or a minute. And if we don't have anyone with a question, we'll move on.
Diane, point of order. Do we need to do a roll call real quick to open the meeting?
Thanks, Carrie. I'm
Small
so sorry.
detail, just small detail.
I'm so sorry. I apologize to everybody. I'm a little off my game tonight.
All right, your flag is beautiful.
Thank you very much. And I spoke with other members of other select board members from other towns, and the way they do it is by alphabetical order, just so that people know when they're coming up. So I think that's probably the fairest way, since we all switch around. So it would be Jack, Corey, Diane, Paul, and Carrie, just in terms of votes and actions. So Jack, do you want to start with a roll call?
Jack Creighton here.
Corey Evans here.
Ann Kennedy here. Paul.
Paul Schubert here.
Carrie Thompson here.
Okay, I'll have an open meeting. If there's any member of the public that has a question, you may ask so now. Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to on the public emergency, and there are items that we're going to talk about in depth. Well, two in particular, each a little park 250, and then give us sort of a step on.
Is anyone else having issue hearing Diane? I'm losing like every other word of hers.
At this point, she looks like she's frozen.
Yeah.
Great.
We may have to have you jump in for a second, Carrie, if we can't get Diane back right away.
No problem. Agenda. I believe we were heading to.
We lost her. So yeah, you're the chair.
Coming back. All right. I think we were headed towards beginning our public emergency update, and beginning with three different topics there, which is the Sandy Beach update, the school reopening update, and the Wadley Park 250th update. So beginning with Sandy Beach, I will let our emergency team take over.
Why don't I take that if it's okay?
Go ahead, Glenn. Go
Madam
ahead.
Chairman? So Sandy Beach has been working relatively well this season. The Sandy Beach Association, as you know, is managing the parking lot as well as their beach. And what that does is it gives them real-time data on how many vehicles are there, how many people are in each vehicle coming in. And with that information, plus the beach manager walking the beach and visibly looking for social distancing and knowing what numbers we have for capacities at high tide and low tide, and taking into account the unusual amount of people that are getting dropped off at the north end gate and walking in. They have closed the beach 3 times because the high tide happens in the afternoon. We have a couple of more weekends in August where that happens again. But it happened this last weekend, and the beach was closed 2 days, and relatively without incident. So I think that's a good thing. We have moved the food vending trucks, the ice cream trucks that come in. They've moved, so they're in the small area outside the gate at the north end of the beach, and area is designated for them. So that makes it a lot safer in a busy, crowded parking lot. And the beach people are very vigilant about social distancing. They have lots of caution and directory signs all over the beach saying distancing, especially when you're at their snack bar. The thing that was interesting to me is that on Saturday of this last weekend, what seems to be a staggering number to me, but 578 cars came and went from the parking lot during the course of the day. So there's 309 parking spaces. There was never a time they were full, but I think at the end of this year, we're going to have a lot of very interesting statistics about what goes on down there, which may help us with some future planning. So unless you've heard things to the contrary, I think it's going very well down there.
I can't tell if Diane's back or not. She looks frozen again. Glenn, I will say,
She just fell off again.
Glenn, I will say, I know Sandy Beach has been doing a really good job of informing people about the tide changes. We never thought we would have a situation where people would have to be turned away from the beach based on tides, but they've been doing a really good job updating on social media. And I think that has been working from what I can tell.
Right. They also, on Monday and Tuesday of last week, they had some cleanup done because there was an unusual amount of seaweed there, which restricts the amount of space available too. So they seemingly are going out of their way to do the right thing. And, each of these things like cleaning the parking lot is not free. So they're pitching in with their own resources too to make it all work. So.
No, I know. Does anyone else on the board have any questions specifically about Sandy? All right, we can move on to the school reopening update, which has been the topic of a lot of discussion in town by everyone the past couple of weeks.
So tonight, I think our primary point of conversation was just to remind folks out there that the schools have released a draft reopening plan. It's up on the schools department's website. You can go to Cohasset K-12.org, K12.org, and there's a link right there. And they've started these Zoom update meetings. The first one was tonight. It was for Deer Hill. The next one is tomorrow night from 6 to 7 for the high school families. The school families are scheduled for Thursday at 6, and then Osgood parents August 3rd. That's a week next Monday. So the plan is up there. We don't, again, I don't know if any of the, and I know that they've been working very closely with Pam and the health department and actually the entire town staff to talk about retrofits and things we need to do to the schools. There's been a lot of work on procurement and cleaning. So we've had a really good partnership. I do know that this is also, as Dr. Sullivan's pointed out repeatedly, it's a draft and it's out there to get comments and to get input from folks. And we just really encourage everyone to take part, all the school parents and folks to take part in those calls. And I understand there was some technical issues earlier tonight with the one at Deer Hill. So hopefully those will be fixed for the future. And if the school needs to do more, I'm sure they'll be willing to, to keep getting as much input as possible. Is there anything else you want to add, Pam, at this point?
No, I was really just going to talk about the travel advisory. I wasn't going to add anything about the schools. Yeah, I think you covered it very well. Thank you.
I just have one thing, Chris, about the schools, and this should make everyone feel comfortable. The initial guidance from the state on the personal protective equipment that the schools were required to have on hand for opening is in fact here, and it's locked up at the Emergency Management Center. So we have a good control on it, and we have everything that was suggested. So we feel pretty comfortable that we're going to start off on the right foot.
Good to know, Glenn. Thank you. So again, that's part of the ongoing partnership, getting that PPE and masks and things like that. So.
Thank you, Chris. And I will say to parents, I know this has been really scary and frustrating not knowing what's happening. All of us educators at all levels, I think, are trying our best. And, special shout out to Superintendent Sullivan. I know he's been working really hard to try to go with the flow here and figure out how we can keep everyone in town as safe as possible. So I'm proud of our town for being as responsive as they have been, and fingers crossed that we can have a start to the school year that's safe and, can continue to be at least partly in person for everyone else. All right. Any other questions on that? All right. Moving on to the Wadley Park 250th update. Corey, go ahead.
Sorry, just one thing. We just had a comment come over, and they didn't identify themselves with location, but I had heard from other parents that there was, as Chris alluded to, a technical issue with people logging in to Zoom, and we're aware of it, and apparently there's a fairly simple fix for that. I don't know if Chris, you want to expand on that, but we are aware of it, and it shouldn't be something that we run into that restriction again.
Yeah, the bandwidth for a webinar, we haven't really tacked it at this point or reached it. Is huge. It's 2,500 participants. That would be like a third of the town practically at the same time. So I'm not quite sure what happened with the webinar tonight, because webinars are designed to have two levels, right? Panelists, which are more limited, which can fully interact, and then attendees. So I guess there shouldn't have been a set capacity to limit the attendees. And I know that the IT staff will work with the folks over at the schools to make sure that tomorrow goes as smoothly as possible. And if they need to add more slots, I'm sure they will. It should be fine. We actually have 19. We've had, I think, 30 or 40 people on our calls before, but scratching 100. But I'm told that we have the full capacity to go to over 2,500. Though again, I can't imagine we'll scratch that at any point.
I wonder if potentially the link that was sent out was maybe a participant link or something. So
that's what I'm wondering too.
If you could follow up with ITS and be sure that we get an answer for that regardless of what it is.
Yeah, clearly we want to make sure that people can access it more cleanly. I don't know the details at this point, Corey. We can all speculate, and it could be that. Hope it's something simple. And if it is, I know that Dan Kelly, who's the new deputy CIO, will be all over this to make sure it's smooth for tomorrow. So
yeah, sorry to interrupt, Chris. I can see that Rob Jeffers at 18 Spring has said that it was limited to 100. So we definitely need to fix that. Although I would love if we had over, a couple thousand people in town participating. That would be amazing.
So I'll follow back up with them tomorrow, because I'm told the capacity limits are much higher than that for webinars, which is what this is. So, but again, to recap, the plan is on the school's website. So if you go to the front page, there's a blue link for the early reopening, for the reopening plan. So everybody wants to read it. And again, they're scheduled to call Zoom sessions at 6 tomorrow night, Wednesday, again Thursday for middle school parents, tomorrow for high school, and following Monday, August 3rd for Osgood school parents. So, and again, I'm sure the schools will send out an update if there's any redo for tonight. So,
and we can definitely check those links too to make sure they're all not,
yes, it's number one on my list for IT tonight. The Wadley Park issue was something I know that Diane had wanted to talk about a little bit tonight, because it's something that you want to talk about more, Carrie?
Yes. So, and Glenn, I'm going to loop you into this as well. This whole discussion began back in the before times, as we say, talking about the 250th anniversary. And the 250th committee had proposed a really interesting idea for a memorial down at Wadley Park. And in doing that planning, what we learned as a town is that we actually do own another little bit of land over there that could possibly have the potential to turn into parking spaces and add a little bit more parking to the Black Rock Beach area. So this is in regards to possible parking additions over there, and also possibly doing or continuing the vision for that memorial, whether we do it for a 250th dedication or not. So Glenn, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. I know you were part of that planning.
Sure. As far as the Mariners Monument itself, that, like everything else, 250 has been temporarily put on hold until we assess the right thing to do. As far as the additional parking, that's been moving along. It's been engineered. Wetlands plants have been flagged. It's moving its way through the Conservation Commission. There is one of the neighbors that has encroached, so some work is being done to talk to them about possibly getting their fence on their own property. I don't have an update on that yet, but the last I heard from the engineers and Brian Joyce at DPW was that it would probably be September with permits were in hand to go ahead and do the work. Chris may have more of an update on that than I do, though. But it is
Okay.
it is moving along, and we'll come out of the box next season for sure with that ready to go, it seems.
And the memorial plans were beautiful, Glenn, I remember, and I think it would add a lot to that area. So I know we're still interested in supporting that as a town, whether it's in a 250th capacity or not. Chris, do you have another update on that parking area, especially since that parking strip has been filled about every day for the past few months?
It's clear that that whole area has become even more popular than it was. So yes, Brian Joyce of Public Works have been active looking at this. They solved one issue, and now they found another one that they're working through.
Okay.
And that said, I think, if we're going to do any work, and it also has to get permitted through Concom because of it's like, so any parking would have to be permitted. So I know they're working through that, and then to get something in front of the Conservation Commission to get a formal. But it's still in progress, and we kind of package this a little bit. I know as a memorial, as public art and park improvements, but not only because that it's done a little differently, but it also makes it eligible for CPC. CPC doesn't fund memorials, but it can fund park improvements and public art. So if it's public amenities and things that enhance a park, that would definitely work. And as you said, there was a great interest, and I think considering how much more actively used it is, sprucing that whole corner up, it's a gate too, right?
Yeah.
From home.
Exactly.
It would be great if we could do something to it. So it's definitely something we can continue talking about.
Fantastic.
If there's nothing else on this, I know that Pam did want to give us an update on there's new state guidance that goes into effect on Saturday, and I think she just wanted to update everybody on what's going on.
Sure. Yeah. Give us your update, Pam.
Okay, great. So it is an important update. It begins Saturday, August 1st, this Saturday. So all travelers arriving in Massachusetts, and so that means residents that have been out of state and then visitors that are coming into the state, that they're supposed to now quarantine for 14 days unless they're arriving from a low-risk state. And so at this point, the low-risk states are the New England states, New York, New Jersey, and Hawaii. And unless you have received a negative test result performed on a sample collected within 72 hours of arrival. So that would mean, before you left wherever you were, you would have to get a PCR test. So not just say like an antibody test or an antigen test, you have to get an actual, swab up the nose test. So you have to have that in hand unless you want to quarantine, or unless you have some other kind of limited exemption. There's some really limited exemptions, like if you're an essential person coming in to do essential infrastructure type of things. So for the most part, like say you're dropping your child off to college and you're going to Pennsylvania or something. Once you drop your child off and turn around, come back home to Massachusetts, you're supposed to quarantine for 14 days, again, unless you can have this test in hand. And everybody returning to the state also, or visiting the state also, must fill out a travel form. It's only available online, and the travel form says, well, you have to swear to one of 4 options, either that you have received the negative test within 72 hours, you plan to get a test, and until you get that test, you're going to remain in quarantine. The third option is you've taken the test and you're awaiting your result, and until then you remain in quarantine, or you agree you're just going to stay in quarantine for the full 14 days. And DPH will text you once they receive the form, and they will keep in touch with you via text, and they will let you know when you're released from quarantine. So this is a big deal for anybody that's thinking about vacationing, or again, dropping their child off at college or something out of the New England Northeast bubble. So that all begins on Saturday.
All right. Thank you for that update, Pam. Any questions for Pam on those new travel guidelines and rules? All right. Oh, Corey, go ahead.
We do just have one question from, again, Robert Jeffers of 18 Spring Street. What are the penalties for, not complying with these new regulations, if there are any?
It's pretty harsh. You could get fined up to $500 if you didn't fill out the form when you were supposed to, and you didn't quarantine like you were supposed to.
So for residents that have come back and have already quarantined or got a negative test, should they also still fill out that form, or?
It begins on Saturday.
Okay, so we're good.
It's not retroactive. Or anything.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
One further comment on that very, very quickly. And Pam mentioned the fact that you have to go and get the swab done. Those tests, according to Mary Goodwin, as of yesterday, those tests are running anywhere from 6 to 10 days to get results at this point. So it's a lot to do with the fact that they have to go through the lab, and the lab is that far backed up. So you might wait 10 days to get your test, your test result. So those contemplating the idea that they can just run back and get a test and be good to go, that might not quite be the case.
Yeah, I know we're hoping in the near future to get the tests that are a lot more accurate, a lot faster, but that doesn't seem to be the case yet. So thank you, Chief. Corey, did you have a question? Oh, yeah. Okay. So before we finish with the public emergency update, I just wanted to recognize Chief Sylvia and Lieutenant Lennon, if either of them had anything else they wanted to add.
Paul had his hands up. Sorry, it wasn't me. It was Paul.
Sorry, Doctor. Wasn't ignoring you.
So if someone goes off out of the quarantine bubble to a different state, returns same day, and they decide they're going to go into quarantine, they could potentially get a test here. Is that right? Now, would they have to wait a few days before getting a test in Massachusetts?
You could get the test right away and then go right back into quarantine again. You are allowed to leave to go get a test.
Okay, so let's say you exit, you come back into the quarantine bubble, you go to get a test, and then you got to wait for the test results to be back. Does that obviate the need for quarantine if it comes back negative? Let's say 4 or 5 days later.
Right, that's when you can be released.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've done at the hospital, is if you're exposed, you're unclear, you basically get tested, you wait 3 days, and you hope it's negative and released. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Paul. All right. Chief Sylvia and Lieutenant Lennon, if you have anything else to add before we move on to our committee appointments.
The only additional thing that I had was that there was a little bit of a tweak to the youth sports program. And with youth sports, soccer had been listed as a high-risk sport, and it's now been moved to the moderate-risk sport, which is exactly where the baseball and softball folks are right now. So we're working, Pam and I are working with the soccer folks in regards to getting their guidelines up and running and their safety protocols in place so that they can start doing this in a safe way for the kids, the coaches, the parents, everybody involved. So that'll be an ongoing project. The good news is that the youth soccer program doesn't usually start until September. So we don't expect to see this happening right away, but we are working on it. So that's really the only other update on the phase 3 part 1 stuff that we presently have at the moment.
Please keep us updated on that, Chief.
Will do.
Lieutenant Lennon, is there anything you'd like to add?
I don't have anything to add at this time. Thank you. I don't know why my screen isn't working.
No problem. We're glad you're here. All right. If that's all there is for that, let's move on to the board committee appointments and.
So Carrie, Diane is actually going to be joining us momentarily. She's actually
Great.
up here in the town hall. But actually, Carol St. Pierre's on for this changing of polling locations. I know that she's probably not asking for that, but I think she just wants to give us an update. And I just sent an email update that she had sent. So there she is. All
right.
Carol, do you want to just explain what this was and why you're not going to do it anymore?
Sure. I was considering changing the polling location, and if I did, it was the Board of Selectmen would have had to participate in that. A memo would have had been signed off today about, it would have been posted on the website, and then the vote would have been taken next week. But I was looking into having a ramp put in on the entrance into Town Hall on the side for early voting, so people aren't walking through Town Hall. And now that it looks like all that's going to happen, it's going to open up space in the polling location, because I don't need that side access for disability, ADA. So that would give me about another 3 or 4 feet. A lot of the election law changes are just now. Secretary of State is going to update us this Thursday on a Zoom meeting, Elections Division. We have the choice to not use the checkout tables. I will not use them. They're going to certify one of the electronic devices to check people in. So I will be using the poll pads. And we're also going to be able to insert the ballots, the early ballots, before Election Day. And I intend to do that.
That's great. That'll make your life a lot easier.
The day more smoothly, run more smoothly. So and that's why I changed my mind. That we should leave the polling location where it is.
No, that's great, Carol, and I'm happy that these election law changes are helping make your life easier. Just to give you a platform real quick, do you want to remind the voters in town of what the registration deadline is for early voting and early ballots?
Early vote. So we've received 1,200 applications so far.
Great.
Early voting starts on August 22nd. It'll be both days, Saturday and Sunday, and all the next week, normal business hours.
Wonderful. All right, thank you.
And the last day to register to vote is August 22nd.
Great, and all of us should push that out to everyone to make sure their voices can be counted. Big elections coming up in September and November. All right, Madam Chairwoman, I see you have changed locations.
And boy, thank you all, and I apologize for that. We lost all connectivity at our house, both TV and phone and everything. So
welcome back.
And thank you, Carol, for that. And I think it's really impressive that there are already 1,200 mail-in ballot requests. That's
great.
Pretty significant. It'll be interesting to see where early voting trends, especially this year.
Absolutely.
And I'm sorry that I missed, and if Carrie, if you wouldn't mind just summarizing any takeaways from the community update in terms of, both beach and Wadley Park in particular.
Things are running fairly smoothly at the beach from what we can tell. In terms of Wadley Park, that's ongoing in terms of whether we want to do the memorial monument, and we're continuing to have the discussion about adding parking there. So that's ongoing, but nothing too urgent.
Yeah.
Pam also gave us, I think, what was the most important update about the new travel advisories, where anyone leaving the state out of New England and coming back in has to self-quarantine. So I think that was probably the most important update. And then Chief Sylvia also gave us a quick update on youth soccer and some of the fall sports that is also ongoing.
Terrific. Thank you. So next I'll transition. Thank you all again. And I apologize for the hassles on my end, technological difficulties. Next up on the agenda is, does anybody have any questions for Carol, or did she left? We're good. Thank you. So, oh boy, this is going to be one of those Zoom meetings that they show on the bloopers reel. So next up is the discussion of board and committee appointments and reappointments. Just to tee up a little bit, these are probably half the committees, and the only ones that we were considering tonight were going to be reappointments in general. So this is going to be something that we're going to accelerate working on over the next couple of weeks, so that certainly by September we have as many full committees as possible. Corey, did you want to?
Yeah, Madam Chairwoman, I just, we discussed during our goals meeting, the importance of having, increased town engagement and really getting people onto boards. And I've got a concern that by, approving people now, we may be better served giving people maybe another 2 weeks to apply for positions. I don't want to give, reappoint and put people on seats just because for the sake of putting people on seats. I want to give people the opportunity to apply. I also don't want to give the sensation that if there's a board that someone's interested in, that there isn't an open seat by prematurely adding people. As I understand it, there would be no harm done by postponing some of these discussions or some of these appointments for another 2 weeks, and that would allow us to, along with the town manager, really do a hard, concentrated push to get a lot more submissions. I did notice that the submissions that we've gotten so far have really increased in speed recently. So I do think that if we had another 2 weeks to look, we may benefit from a more diverse talent pool. And then we can look at, more committees kind of at once. I'd like to get kind of the board's feedback on that concern.
So I'll open it up for discussion. Corey, do you want to make a motion? And I think we could have a more fulsome discussion if you moved postponement.
Yeah, I would like to make a motion to postpone committee appointments until the next Board of Selectmen meeting to allow for increased participation of residents in applying for town boards.
Second.
Carrie, was that a second?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just for some clarification, and then I would love to open it up for discussion. Our next meeting is next week, is Tuesday, August 4th. The meeting that is scheduled at this point after that isn't until August 25th. So we have 2 weeks off in the middle of August. So this would either be pretty much a 4-week postponement of appointments or a 1-week postponement of appointments. So I think we should discuss that. And then the other thing to consider, and I just want to put it out there, Corey nodded to this, that, all positions those individuals remain in those positions until either a reappointment or somebody else is appointed to that seat. So it wouldn't materially impact any of the activity of the committees. So
is there a meeting? I'm sorry, is there a meeting? I know we have 1 week, maybe that feels a little too short. 4 weeks does seem a little bit too long. So I definitely am sensitive to that, the awkward timing there. Are either of those two meetings that, I know it's hard to project, but we may have more time in the agenda for? Is there one just that more naturally would fit, hopefully?
Yeah. No, I think this is an interesting agenda because a couple of items on it are being removed, and which including Carol's, which wouldn't have been that long, but nonetheless I do think they're all going to be full. And we got to, the most important thing is we do what's right for the community and for the town. So we'll work it. If we have to start a meeting an hour later, we'll do that. I don't know that, Corey, by postponing it till next week is actually going to resolve any of your
I think concerns. We need more than a week. I'd like to work with, Chris and the other board members to really do a good blast of invites for people.
Yeah.
I will say, I think that this particularly has nothing against our applications we have now that we were maybe going to approve tonight. I think we have some fantastic people in there, so it has nothing to do with them. I just know it's a broader goal of ours this year and in the future to be a little more inclusive and get more voices involved. So I want to make sure the people who have applied don't think that we're particularly unhappy with their applications. That's not at all that's not why I seconded the motion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also important, when we can get this, Paul, I'll recognize you in a second. We can get this spelled out. We did get something in our packets, I think, the last week, but there are still multiple spaces on alternative energy. At the very least, Conservation Commission would have 2 associate members if we were to go forward with moving folks up there and reappointments. And I believe Open Space and Rec also has openings that even with appointments, there would still be positions. So those are places where, you know, we definitely need more people to look at. Paul?
So just clarification, none of these terms that are currently existing would expire. They would just continue until replacement or reappointment. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's my understanding. The only one position that we were going to appoint tonight, which isn't a community appointment, is the representative to the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and we have traditionally appointed the planner. And who, you know, in the history, that somebody from the staff is typically that representative, and then the planning board makes a recommendation for, I think, a kind of a secondary appointment there should the planning director not miss a meeting. Is that right, Chris?
Yes. So Lauren would be appointed as the town's representative. And usually there's oftentimes it's a government official and often planners that serve in that role. And we've had the chair of the planning board as the alternate because Clark engaged. It doesn't have to be the chair. It could be anybody else from the planning board or even this board, by the way. But we've had it as the planning board primarily because of the topic.
So, you know, I don't know how the board feels. We could consider just making that appointment tonight since it's a staff appointment. She's in the position anyway, but that's just, you know, it's not, there's almost no reason to wait for that.
Could I make an amendment to the motion
You sure can.
that would delay the appointments except for MAPC appointment with Lauren Lind, 1-year term as a full member?
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion on the amendment to the motion? Okay, all those in favor? Roll call, starting with Jack. Corey?
Aye. Jack Creighton, aye.
Corey?
Corey Evans, aye.
Diane Kennedy, aye. Paul?
Paul Stewart, aye.
And Carrie?
Carrie Thompson, aye.
Okay, so so now if somebody would like to move the appointment of Lauren Lind, our planning director, to the MAPC.
Just quick point of clarification. Was
Sure.
that vote on the amendment or was it on the motion?
It was on the amendment.
Okay. And okay, thank you. So should we vote on?
So the amendment only took out her from the point of view of the.
Right, so we should vote on the postponement.
We can vote.
first. Right, because that's the open thing on the board. Okay.
Yep. Anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we appoint Lauren Lind for the term of 1 year to the MAPC.
Is there a second? Paul, you're on mute. Should we have
I
taken the
think
main motion first?
I think the original motion is on the floor.
Got it.
So we'd
Sorry,
have
my
to vote
bad.
on the delay of the other appointees, then we can
Vote
go
on
back to a
Got
separate
it.
motion with the
Thank
MAPC
you.
appointment.
All right, thank you. So we have a motion and a second on the main motion amended to postpone the appointments with the exception of MAPC. We have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion on this? Okay, then we'll go to a vote, starting with Jack.
Jack Creighton, aye.
Corey?
Corey Evans, aye.
Paul
Diane
Stewart, aye.
Kennedy, aye. Got it. Carrie?
Carrie Thompson, aye.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, the motion to appoint Lauren Lind, Planning Director, to the MAPC.
I make a motion, we approve and appoint Lauren Lind to MAPC for a 1-year term as a full member.
Is there a second? Okay. Roll call vote again in alphabetical order, starting with Jack.
Jack Creighton, aye. By the way, Madam Chairman, I've had my hand up for past 5 minutes. I don't know if you're not seeing it or not.
I am not seeing it, Jack. Sorry about that. Did you use your
I used the,
icon?
I didn't see
yep.
either, Jack. I'm sorry.
It is not showing up. I apologize. Do you
anyway,
wanna-
what I was going to comment about was long since passed. So never mind.
Okay, sorry. Can you maybe just raise your hand? Because I'm not seeing the hand. I usually do, and I appreciate that you use it.
Yeah.
Okay, next is Corey on the vote.
Corey Evans, aye.
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Paul Schubert, aye.
Carrie Thompson, I.
Okay, so we are going to postpone and the appointments and reappointments. That'll give us time. And then I think what we should do is we'll ask Tracy to send out another press release. We'll get it up on the town's social media pages first, and then we can all expand out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds good. And just on the, if you open up the, sorry, Madam Chairwoman, if you open up the participants button, if you hit that, you'll be able to see the screen where the hand raising is. I didn't see that either. I just clicked on it and found it. So.
Okay, usually it shows up on the screen in the past. I've seen it there. So anyway, Jack, is there anything on the topic of committees that you want to add?
No, anything that I was going to, it's long since passed. No
Okay.
big deal.
All right, thank you. And I have that up now. So here we are. The next agenda item is modifications to parking fines. It is listed as an 8 o'clock. It's not a formal hearing, so I'll just ask the board if they're comfortable with moving forward on this discussion. I know Lieutenant Greg Lennon is with us, but if anybody, I hesitate to take 15 minutes off, especially given this the hiccups of this meeting on my
Make a
end.
motion, we move the item for parking fines to present time in the agenda.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on the movement on the agenda? Okay,
Oh, Jack is waving.
Jack is waving. I see you, Jack.
Just self-preservation for the select board. Notice I said select board.
Good
Um,
work. You're
talking
doing better than I
about
am.
Very significant increases in parking fines. I think we ought to make sure that it's done exactly on the time that we put it on the agenda for, there's going to be some pushback. So let's not kind of start the pushback by saying, well, we moved it out of agenda. So that would only be my question.
I tend to agree with that on this particular item.
I remove my motion.
Yeah.
Okay, thank
I don't
you.
mind being roadkill, but I don't want to make it too easy.
No, I think you're right. Even though it's not a formal hearing, I think it's something that we should stay on. So the next step is to discuss our goals and objectives, kind of flesh out some of the topics that we discussed. If you would all want to move to that, and we can discuss that for the next 12 minutes till 8, put a stop on that, and then move back to the parking fines discussion. Corey?
That may be a good option also, since this is recorded. We can grab that and we can grab the discussion about our goals and highlight that for the town. That way, if anyone missed it, they can still view it, in live format later on.
Yep. Great. Okay. So I'm going to bring that
You need a
up.
motion for that?
We need a motion just to move that agenda item up to present time.
Okay, I make a motion to move the review and adoption of FY21 goals and objectives of the select board from its 8:15 slot to a 7:50 slot.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. And roll call vote on that. Jack?
Jack Creighton, aye.
Corey Evans, aye.
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Paul Schubert, aye.
Carrie Thompson, I.
Great. Okay, Chris, do you want to, we have the 3 goals that we came up with. Obviously, the top goal is discussing a healthy Cohasset, and I did send a summary to Jack, I believe, who missed the meeting, but I think it's important for us to kind of talk about what what that meant, because it really, not to be at all slighting of the very important sort of primary goals that are within that. A lot of them are ones that we had as our primary goals last year. Carrie, do you feel comfortable kind of summarizing what that discussion?
Do you want me to put the goals up on the screen while you talk about it?
Yeah, that would be helpful,
Okay.
Chris. I mean,
All right.
because we're all looking at them, I'm sure, on our computers. That way it'll be a little bit easier. And then the community can see it.
There we go. I am really excited about this first community health goal. I think that it addresses things that we never necessarily expected to be addressing this year. So that includes the obvious things about, keeping our community physically healthy based on the ongoing pandemic and how we're responding to that. So it absolutely includes that most obvious glaring point, but also this goes a little bit broader to think about other ways in which we as a community can be healthier. And it absolutely is going to address ways that we can be more inclusive, that we can be more diverse, that we can address a lot of the social unrest going on for very good reason, and figuring out how we as a town can best attack that. And this also includes things like mental health and addiction and all of the ways that our community has been struggling for a lot of years with dealing with these types of issues. And I know that it might seem like a broad goal to start, but I do think there are a lot of actionable bullet points and steps that we can take as a board and that we can take as a town to work on the overall health and to try to make sure that everyone in our town feels welcome and feels healthy and, has access to being able to voice their concerns and opinions. So it's a broad overarching goal, but considering what's gone on, in the past 6 months in our town, in our state, in our country, we think it's appropriate. And we think that there are a lot of things we can do this year to continue to make Cohasset even healthier than it is now.
So a couple other things that we envision being underneath this, and I know that the way we've done this in the past couple of years is that we adopt the goals, which we have not adopted, that we hope to do so tonight. And then in this particular goal, the community health goal, we really do need to spell out in the adoption of the goals some of the very specific items that we're looking at. And then Chris will take it back to the staff as we did last year and kind of come up with, so how do we attain certain benchmarks? What are the actual action steps that are going to be taken? So one of the things we started with on this particular goal was the goal last year to deal with the addiction issue. So I see that as being one thing that just gets rolled up as, and with all the sub projects, ideas, concerns that were within that. So that stays where it's at. Another big thing that from last year that is going to get rolled under healthy community is affordable housing. And then some of the things that Carrie brought up, and then to Corey's point, and you can discuss this, I don't want to have the floor the whole time, but this is what we were talking about with the committees. Like a healthy community is an engaged community, is an active community, and what steps can we do to kind of realize that? One of which is to get more people involved and engaged and participating in town government. Active could also mean, commitments to open space and recreation and things like that. So I see a lot of the master plan implementation goals, which were 5, they're all in here one way or another, not necessarily under the health, but certainly some of them are there, like affordable housing. Anybody else?
Yeah, and to jump off that, I mean, Carrie and Dan, thank you for really summarizing it so well. And I'll just add to it, on the topic of being engaged, it's also a community that's going to be informed and is able to take advantage of town services. We talked a lot about how so many services in town that have been disrupted by COVID-19 that some people don't feel are accessible anymore. We get lots of questions that the door is closed and how do we do this? And part of a healthy community is being able to be sure that our services adapt to the current times. And that's something we talked a lot about. And I firmly believe that the healthy community umbrella, I wouldn't say that I would say that all these things are things that are supporting that one vision. So when we approach something, we say, is this going to support the health of Cohasset in all facets? And I really like how we put that under that umbrella. So thank you all for the discussions we had. I thought they were really wonderful.
Yeah, Paul.
So I like also, kind of reiterate that. I mean, looking at how to run a healthy town, a lot of it has to do just with the administration, where we've switched over to these Zoom meetings. But as Corey said, trying to get just simple things completed, inspections for the house, and trying to get construction permits and things like that, they're online, but it's not as easy as it once was. And that's, I think, a goal to try to make things more facile for the members of the town, whether it's a building permit or trying to find out about, the one I always get is the dump stickers, or just, the public nurse, what do we do when something is up with, health issue in town, like a positive case, for example. Those sorts of things, I think, do encompass that.
So exactly. We very specifically mentioned website and communications. And I think that, we all hear it for example, with some of these beach closings, one of the questions I keep getting is, well, how do I find out about it? And, the police department's been good about putting it on their Facebook page, but, is that enough? I don't know. Is that something that could get pushed out in a different way? So I think, so here's what I have right now, and then jump in, and Jack, obviously, if you have any other thoughts on this discussion. So one is inclusivity and diversity. What does that look like in terms of both, hiring practices, and what can we do as a municipal structure to support those kinds of efforts out in the community, whether it's, having a liaison to the diversity club or whatever. So there's that piece. Obviously, addiction and mental health, which is the rollover goal from last year. Affordable housing, the committee ecosystem, or however we want to define that. What can we do? And we struggle with this, and then we move on to other things. But honestly, what can we do to ensure that more people want to be engaged, want to stay engaged, want to shift it up maybe and switch from one committee to another elected position, or whatever that might look like, and how we can support that. And then website and communications, or communications and websites, basically what can we create to engage people? It's kind of an engagement strategy, and how we message things. Yep.
Could I just tweak? I mean, so yeah, engagement, and then that last point I would actually maybe put into the realm of accessibility. So it's the ease of people getting information, including, for people that may not have may have disabilities, they have access to town stuff, they have access to information. That's also part of the health community. So it's accessibility as well as engagement. Those are kind of two big bullet points here.
And definitely accessibility for technology, as we were saying, our website, social media, Zooms.
Jack is waving.
Jack.
Well, I think one of the, if we want people to participate, it helps if they feel that their participation is meaningful. And to that thing, having open and transparent government, there's a tendency when you want to get things done to have some private meetings. And, one suggestion I've heard from the community is that when you have private meetings, memos should be out there, because people really need to know what's being done in their name. After all, there isn't anything that we are doing that we are exercising power that rightfully belongs to the people, and we're just temporary trustees. So open and transparency, I think, is very important. And I'll go back to what I say every meeting chance that we have, is we need to fast forward the youth center with the epidemic, particularly alcoholism, drug addiction is hitting parents. What do you think it does to their kids? So we need to have an open outreach to these particularly these middle school kids. And I don't know how we get this done, but I think it's urgent. And I say it a lot. And guess what? I'm going to continue saying it a lot. Okay.
And Chris, just in terms of, Tori, I'll get right to you, but just in terms of that in particular, you know, the safe harbor has been kind of the landing spot for what is kind of a monumental, you know, larger topic. And their grant focus for the most part is relatively narrow. And I know, so I think that's something we need to look at is, are we and how do we reach all of these populations within this, you know, dealing with addiction and mental health issues, and you know, and have some specific goals within each of, you know, however we want to define certain populations. And I know with the teen center, we were discussing, is it a tween center? Is it a teen center? And, you know, looking to the people that know, the schools and Safe Harbor and other experts to try to help us look at the different population segments, if you will, that, and what we can do to support them. So, Carrie? You're mute.
Sorry, want to highlight a comment, first of all, from Rob Jeffers at 18 Springs, saying that people need to feel they can get something done. If committees cannot
Yes.
accomplish things in a reasonable amount of time, it's not very motivational. But just to add to that, and I think that this fits with what we're talking about in terms of the teen center and also committees, this is a town where a lot of people don't feel included. And we have a problem because a lot of things are run by a small amount of the same people. And I'm not saying those people aren't good people and they're not working hard, but there are a lot of especially newer residents in town that haven't really been invited and don't feel welcome. And we need to make that a little more inclusive of a culture. I think part of it's a little puritanical, right? You know, new people in town are not from here, and every New England town deals with that. But you talk to a lot of newer residents and newer voters in town, and they don't really feel like they're invited to be part of the process. And I think that we really can help with that on all of these levels, and our young people too, Jack. You know what I mean? Like we're having issues with mental health and addiction and, you know, poor life choices with our students and our younger town residents because they don't feel welcome by their peers.
Right.
So it's something that I think we need to address on a lot of different levels holistically.
And to that point, Carrie, like I think it was a couple months ago, you know, and we're also working in a strange world now of Zoom, and but a couple months ago, while we were putting together the warrant, one of the things we talked about was how to, you know, have a warrant education conversation. I know Chris does it on 143 TV, but even that's limiting if you're, you know, the new person in town and you get something in the mail, and, you know, whether it's a League of Women Voters or some other partnership that we can look to. So, I mean, these are all the kinds of things that we, you know, we want to at least discuss and, you know, move forward. Corey?
Yeah, I just want to one thing that I was listening to a podcast today, and it was highlighting the concept that the best, most creative, best solutions are made when there are a variety of people from a variety of viewpoints. And I firmly believe the more people we can get into a room to talk about something, the better the outcome. And it's proven. It's actually proven. So, you know, different educations, different professions, new to town, old to town. All these viewpoints are so important for us to make the right decision. So if you're out there and you're thinking about joining a committee, do it, because you're just going to enhance, you know, how this town functions, and we need you.
Thus, the, you know, the inclusivity and diversity, and, you know, how that works. So, you know, maybe that is kind of under inclusivity and diversity. It starts addressing some of those, like, ways to get different voices in town. There's obviously the big inclusivity and diversity that we need to deal with kind of structurally, but there are all these other things to just bring more people to the table. Absolutely. One of the things that I want to, and if it's okay with the board, what I'd like to do is be respectful of Lieutenant Lennon's time and maybe move to that discussion, come back to this. Chris,
And I just one thing that you talked about last week, I just want to make sure if it's still on the table,
Thank you.
is having an economically vital, a vital economic as well. I just want to make sure
I knew there was one master plan implementation goal that we didn't list under this. That is it. And so one of the things I want us to think about, and we'll come back to this in a few minutes, but think about over the next couple of weeks is the master plan implementation committee proposed to us based on their five priorities, coming up with kind of cross committee working groups. And I would like each of the members of the select board to think about, which of those master plan priorities you would most like to tackle, as opposed to, and not to say that we're not going to do this as well, but in some of the just committee liaison stuff, I would like each of us to sort of, in partnership, we don't have to do it one person, but to be that person, that select board representative at some of these working groups by topic, more so than by, you're the sewer liaison. Well, no, you're going to be the regional sewer discussion needs somebody there. So start thinking about sort of the projects, the items that you're most passionate about, so we can plug you in. Corey, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, we don't have on the agenda the economic development update. Is there a space where we can just briefly mention that, or should I do that now?
Absolutely. And we talked about that, Carrie and I, when we were doing the agenda with that we can talk about it within this context, because economic development is part of our goals and objectives. But I'm going to put us on a pause for right now and go to the agenda item on discussing the parking fines. And we have Lieutenant Lennon from Cohasset Police Department, if he's still with us.
Only 7 minutes behind.
There he is. Hi, Lieutenant Lennon. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Hi, do you want to kind of review the memo that was in our packet from the chief and just kind of touch upon, mostly for the public listening, the proposed fee changes?
Sure. So the request was that the select board consider. Okay, there we go.
There it is. Thank you, Chris.
So do you need me to still go over it? Basically,
yeah, if you could just summarize it.
Sure. We're asking the select board to consider a temporary increase in parking fines for non-permanent vehicles, essentially at areas such as Wadley Park, Black Rock Beach, Sandy Beach, Governor Island, and the Parker Avenue lot, with the hope that it will be a higher, deterrence factor for people that seem to be ignoring the existing parking fines as a deterrent. Because as we know, there's a lot more people out and about right now. And we've been having issues with, overflow parking and illegally parked vehicles. And so we were hoping that by temporarily increasing the fines, it might be more of a deterrent.
And my understanding, a couple of things, the temporary is really just to get us to a point where we can look at this more holistically in terms of all fines in the town. By law, handicapped and blocking a fire hydrant, which pose significant safety issues, the maximum fine is $200, and we have not upped these fees, as you can see below in the memo, since 2001. So we felt, that the chief recommended that those go right to the max because of the safety issues. And then the parking violations up to 100, I think makes sense, because most people that buy a sticker, they pay $50. So, I think that $100 is very reasonable, especially under the circumstances right now. Carrie?
And I want to echo, we're not this isn't us just trying to be, punitive for no reason. This is us trying to protect the residents of Cohasset during a time like this when there's a pandemic, when we have so many people from out of town taking town spots. So we're trying to protect our own residents who have stickers so they can get parking. I know that there will be some people who aren't happy about it, and we want to hear your opinions if you're not, but it's just been really bad, and a lot of people are parking where they shouldn't be, and the current prices are not a deterrent. People are coming and expecting to get a ticket and are fine paying it. It just doesn't seem like a healthy way to be doing things. So we're not trying to just be mean. We're trying to protect residents.
Right, exactly. Corey, you were next, and then Paul.
Yeah, I gotta say, I don't especially love this. And I guess the thing that we're assuming is that people are, making this conscious decision to do this. And I mean, Lieutenant, if you could speak to a little bit about your experience if upping a fine, especially a parking fine like this, does have an immediate effect of changing people's behavior. Because, and I'm not necessarily complaining about the fine amounts, but there is a process to do this, which if our fines are outdated, we should just go through that process and fix it properly rather than doing something temporary. So, Lieutenant, I'm sorry for asking you a question and then interrupting, but, is it your experience that doing a change like this really does impact, behavior of people?
I don't know that doing a change I don't have any firsthand evidence that making a change like this impacts behavior. But what I can say is that I have heard people make comments over the course of my over 25 years here, where people have said things like, they're willing to pay the fine, like say at Sandy Beach or whatever, because even going out to an event in Boston would cost them at least $50 in parking. So for some people, they're actually, I have heard them comment that they're willing to, at $50, they're willing to pay that fine to be able to park somewhere for the day. Now, whether or not increasing it to 100 would change it, I guess, that's the assumption, but I guess time would have to tell on that.
What of these issues of these fines are like the most prevalent? Obviously, there's some that we cite all the time, and there's some, I think, blocking a fire hydrant's a very obviously safety concern. On the priority here, what are the ones you struggle with the most?
As far as what gets most of our attention, it's the permit parking. Generally, thank goodness, most people don't park in front of fire hydrants or in handicap spots. It does happen, but it's not what I would call a major problem. But most of our focus is on the various recreational parking areas, essentially like Sandy Beach or Wadley Park or Government Island and so forth. People occasionally launching their boats from Parker Ave without having a parking permit. So that's where most of our efforts are directed at this time of year. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, it seems like probably the parking in front of a fire hydrant, I don't have a problem putting that up to $200. That's probably not all that common. I think what these three items that we're looking to raise, the biggest one is probably going to be the parking permits at the beach and the parking around town. And that, anyone can get a parking permit, and if it's expired, then certainly you can go to, for an appeal. And if you live in town and you fill it out, you'll get the appeal. It's really designed to prevent packing of people not from town taking over the parking, where, this is a unusual time where we really need to have the outdoor space available. And if it means driving down and parking at the beach and it's full, a lot of people get annoyed. So I have no problem with these. I'm done.
Yep, sorry. Jack, and then Carrie.
Yeah, I kind of echo a little bit what Paul says. If you're a resident in Cohasset and paying our taxes and doing all that, and you take your boat down to Parker Avenue and you see somebody from 5 towns away or whatever is taking those very limited trailer spots, you go down to Sandy Beach. I mean, we've had a tremendous amount of pushback. Black Rock, it's the same area. You know, there's not very many spaces. It's very popular. And $50 doesn't do it. At a higher thing, it does. And the other thing I wanted to ask Lieutenant Lennon, do we have the ability to tow? I mean, a couple of towing things would pass the word very quickly. Somebody comes back from on their boat and they ask where their truck and trailer is. If it's at Joe's parking lot, they'll never come to Parker, of course.
Right.
I
Typically,
wouldn't want to be the guy running Joe's parking lot when they come for their trailer. But I don't know. I mean, do we have the ability to tow?
typically we only do that if there's like the car presents a public safety hazard. Like if it's, blocking the travel part of a way, or it's, for example, it's blocking a fire hydrant and we can't contact them to move it. We do not, as a practice, tow, otherwise, legally parked vehicles, with the exception of the lack of permit.
Okay.
I think a couple of meetings ago, Chief Quigley mentioned that especially at Black Rock at Wadley Park, they because the cars are parked kind of parallel and really tight together, that they couldn't actually physically get a tow there. And one of the agitations, I think, is for the residents is when they go there and they see 2 or 3 cars out of a total of 9 spaces that are from out of town or don't have a sticker. Then they start misbehaving, then they're pulling up on the land where they're not supposed to be. And one of the police officers this weekend was very kind, because a resident was very frustrated and did just that, pulled up on Wadley Park as much as they could because there was no other place to park. And he very nicely went and found her asked everybody on the beach, is that your car? You need to move, you need to move. And so I think it will mitigate some unfortunate interactions. Carrie, I know you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, this is also why sidebar we need to keep pursuing getting a little bit of extra parking at Black Rock. But we have a resident comment from Jay Pimpari at 713 Jerusalem saying, I quote, completely agree with the increase in fines. People would rather pay $50 for the day to go to the beach, but $100 might deter them. $200 for fire hydrants for safety concerns and $200 for parking and handicap spot is great.
Go, Jay.
Of us. And then we'll move to a vote.
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at deterring, why $100? I mean, why not $200? I mean, if this is, if we're deterring, I guess I'm just, my struggle here is that we've kind of arbitrarily decided this number will make a difference. And I don't think we know if that's true or not. If we're trying to solve the problem, maybe we go higher.
Lieutenant Lennon or Chris, my understanding is 100 was the max that we could charge. And that's, so it's consistent with the $200, fire hydrant is the state max. Chris, is that your understanding, Greg?
I don't know that it's illegal per se, but I know in the conversation with Chief Quigley, it seemed, blocking a fire hydrant and a handicap violation are very significant safety issues. And while an expired time permit is most certainly incredibly frustrating, it didn't seem to rise to the level of a safety issue. So during the conversation that I had with him, it seemed that going up higher 100 seemed it seemed out of proportion to the potential offense. Because remember, there's a deterrent effect for this, but you have to look at it in context of the other fines. And again, I think our base fine is $25. By the way, it still hasn't changed from that. And most of the tickets that are written are overextended parking in the village, or as Greg said, Lieutenant Lennon said, these no permits in permanent opening areas. So I would have to go back and double check, but I don't know that it was necessarily illegal to go up to 200, but it seemed, at least from my conversation with the chief, that it seemed potentially excessive. But again, that's a decision for all of you.
Paul?
So I think, doubling the fine for parking is fine, but to make it at the level of blocking a fire hydrant,
Right.
or handicap, I think 200 is too much.
Yep.
And
Corey,
No, I'm good. Thank you for
you're
listening.
good? Lieutenant Lennon, any last words?
I don't think I don't think so at the moment.
Sounds like we're on the right path or page or,
Your court now.
great. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So we have the fines in front of us. Would anybody like to make a motion?
Quick question.
Sure.
Sorry,
Who had the
I hit
question?
mute.
Sorry, Corey.
On the packet, it says temporary increase in parking fines, and then it says a permanent increase for the handicapped and fire hydrants. So I just want to be sure if we make a motion on this, we're clear about what the temporary window is, and that we specify that one is a temporary increase and one is a permanent increase.
Thank you for clarifying that. And yeah, I do. The intent on the parking was so that, we could review fees in general. I think we should put a date certain in the motion. Thank you. Chris?
If I was going to recommend something, I would say maybe September 30th. That gives you to the fall. I mean, I realize the beach officially closes Labor Day weekend, but it's still a fairly active place through September. And then same with Wally Park and Government Island. It also gives you time and gives us time to come back to all of you perhaps in September with a more robust review.
With how it all worked out. Yep, that's sort of where I was thinking as well. Would somebody like to make a motion?
Do we want to split these motions?
Or it might just be easier.
That's my question. Okay.
I make a motion that we increase the fine parking in front of a fire hydrant and parking and blocking a handicap ramp to $200 per incident.
Is there a second? Go ahead. All right. Roll call vote, starting with Jack.
Jack Creighton, aye.
Corey?
Corey Evans, aye.
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Paul Schubert, aye.
Harry Thompson, aye.
Okay, great.
I make a motion that we raise the permit fee violation to $100 per incident until to be reassessed September 30th, 2020.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
And a roll call vote, beginning with Jack.
Jack Creighton, aye.
Corey?
Corey Evans, I still don't love it, but I'm convinced by your arguments and the idea that it's a needed thing for the health of our town. So Corey Evans, aye.
Yeah. Get used to the biting the lower lip votes. Diane Kennedy, aye.
Paul Schubert, aye.
Harry Thompson, aye.
Okay, great. Those fines, and I believe they go into effect immediately. The other, just wrap up, if I remember correctly, having a conversation with Chief Quigley is that, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, we are going to a different, more automated system of ticketing and issuing tickets. And that was another reason why we thought a temporary, a more holistic review of fines and fees would be appropriate at that time.
Yeah, we are actually looking at a new provider for our ticketing devices. At the moment, we've kind of reverted to all manual, though those are blank, so the fines can be filled in by, if they change. So if we're going to go to a new devices, which I think I'm on a call later in the week looking at a Zoom demonstration of something, we will hopefully have something in place for the fall, something new, which will speed up the process. A lot of manual labor intensiveness behind the scenes that we would like to replace.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Lieutenant Lennon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
Good night.
Hang in there.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Lieutenant.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, we'll circle back to our discussion of our goals and objectives. Chris, do you want us to flesh out any more on goals 2 and 3?
I'll put them back up on the screen so you can look at them again, but I think they're fairly self-explanatory.
Can I just wrap up on Econ Dev? I think that's where we kind of cut it off.
Yep, sure.
Okay. Yeah,
Yep.
I just wanted to broadcast to the town, we've actually broadened, I just talked about broadening things. We broadened the discussion even further. And Jack, myself, and a few of the committee heads in town are going to have a strategy meeting, and we're hoping to have an open forum with the town, maybe a little bit of a listening session in the coming weeks where we can hear from town about, how we keep the economy of Cohasset alive and vibrant. So stay tuned for that.
And I know you've reached out to, I think, Amy Glassmeyer from planning, who's in economic development, has expertise in that area, and also Katie Dugan, and this is right within the Master Plan Implementation Committee. And when we talk about the working groups, hopefully you'll both want to stay in that arena as well, so that we can have some consistency and start moving all of these ideas forward to some actual actionable steps. So appreciate that.
Just let us know, Corey, if you need any technical support with doing a Zoom call or something. All right.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Chris, you're going to put that back up? So as I said, I think we covered a lot of ground and moved a lot of both master plan priorities and also some of our priorities from last year under healthy community. And then we've got two, capital infrastructure, which are the big capital money projects, and those discussions here. Let you all read it.
Would it be helpful for, well, I obviously we're going to talk about Elm Street corridor, but I know that there was a lot of good information in our meeting that Chris shared with us. I'd like to give him a moment to just kind of review why we put that on a bullet point here.
Sure, Corey. There's obviously, I think everyone knows in the community, there's a large proposal to redevelop the Cohasset Harbor site, which is at the end of Elm Street, right at the harbor. No, I'm sorry. Yes, on Elm Street. It's also been identified as both a goal of the harbor and the master plan, because the Elm Street corridor links the village to the harbor. So it's a critical corridor. It's been identified by the community as a critical corridor. In addition, there are water and sewer mains that need to be replaced on that road, and that road needs to be repaved. So it's kind of a perfect infrastructure storm, if you will, of timing to get something done there. In order to do so, it's been identified as that, and it was also a top priority of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. It's one of the things that they pulled out and said, this is a timely matter. And there's potential grant funding for this as this goes along because of the economic development, potential housing components, and the resiliency issues. And at the same time, there's talk about whether or not relocating the public safety facility to up to 3A makes sense. And we have a grant out to do some analysis of that. Hopefully we'll get word on that fairly soon. So there's a whole lot of pieces that have come together, and they all need to kind of happen together, and the community needs to engage to decide, is this a priority? I mean, we can very easily just dig up the road and put new water and sewer lines down and just pave it and keep it the same. But this is an opportunity, because once you do that, though, we don't like to dig up the road again for another 10 years, because you spent all that money, you don't want to wreck it. So this is the window now to have that community conversation, and if the road needs to be redesigned, if it's going to be made nicer and really have that linkage, it's time.
That's just one important thing that I haven't considered. I'm sure master plan implementation has, but just in terms of the Elm Street corridor being the site of our public safety facility right now. So I think it's going to be important to obviously include them and also have that discussion in the context of these capital projects that have been out there for a while, including, where public safety facility needs are going to go and how they will be met in the future. So, this is what's great, I think, about how the Master Plan Implementation Committee presentation that we got, really trying to make sure that we have all the right stakeholders or content experts on a particular matter talking to each other in the room, because conversations, as we all know, happen in meetings and they can get stuck there and then things don't move forward. And, I think the comments about getting people active on committees, they want to see progress. They want to see that things happen and that the time that people put into it matter. So that is going to be a discussion, I think, next week, just in terms of how we're going to structure working groups I've had a conversation that I have to pick up with town council just about how do you structure a working group in terms of, appointments? Can you have people, people that aren't appointed to a working group as part of a working group? There's some little mechanics from from the municipal management open meeting law standpoint that I don't have the answers to, but hopefully we'll have that fleshed out for next week. So again, town hall, that just kind of moves under this bucket, and then the big intermunicipal sewer and water discussions that, as Chris said, are pretty timely. And I think some of these are all really big items. And I think one of the most important things we can do, or we can ask Chris to help us do, is put some timeframes on these. When should we be, 6 months ago is the answer to a lot of this, but, where are the benchmark dates where we need to make some decisions about, regional sewer, and what that might look like, and who's involved in those discussions, and make sure those get, that we keep these on a timeline. It's particularly with capital infrastructure. Those discussions are more, it's critical to have some timetables attached to them. Corey?
And I guess, the drum that I'm constantly beating is one thing that master plan did so wonderfully was reach out for the community involvement and feedback, and got some really great data. And whatever we do, intermunicipal water and sewer is an enormous project, and we need that level of engagement with the town again. I want to say out loud, and everyone here, I want to be sure we prioritize involving people in the process just as much as we prioritize coming to the answer.
Absolutely. And that's that's ultimately a town meeting decision. So if you don't have the stakeholders, which are the residents of this town, kind of, understanding. And again, it's challenging. We had a meeting, I think it was 2 years ago, to talk about regional sewer. And there was a lot of people invited, like planning board and Concom and water and et cetera. But those are the people that showed up, and it was open. It was, we were trying to get a lot of people there, and that was there. Zoom might be easier, or sometimes it's a little more difficult to have those fulsome, community conversations. So I think we have to look at all of these discussions in that context. Carrie, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was going to say that. I think we're going to have some bigger Zoom or WebEx events in town to get people feeling included, especially on certain topics like this. Maybe some, quote unquote, listening tours, hearing people's feedback and buy-in. But, in some ways it's great because it makes it easier for people to attend meetings as well. So I actually think we would have a pretty robust showing online. We just need to make it inclusive and, be ready for a lot of discussion.
This can meet our goal number one too.
Right.
Maybe we have I hate to say it, Jack, we have a couple of State of the Union addresses, like, to just roll out these goals, and then and maybe we create some sort of neighborhood kind of, find neighborhood captains, if you will, who aren't necessarily people sitting on a committee, but are going to go to their neighbors and say, hey, we're all going to do a Zoom hour at 6 o'clock on Wednesday, and we're going to hear about the plans too. And we have to be really, really active about reaching out and bringing people into the conversation. Jack?
Yeah, I think the sewer expansion is a particularly potentially dangerous issue. Situate has a need to get rid of it. We'd like to see the pollution lessen that's coming from North Situate into Cohasset. Hull has an underutilized, expensive plant. They'd like us to pay top dollar to ship Situate's sewerage through Cohasset. I don't know what Cohasset gets out of this. We have to be very careful about that. We also have the ongoing issue of the Stop and Shop Plaza, where there's some pressure being put on the town to allow that property to tie into the town sewer, even though they do have the capacity to have their own treatment plant. But because of egregious failures at the feng shui and other issues, they do need to replace that. There's a tremendous expansion going on there. I don't know, economically, it's questionable. They can't fill vacancies. So sewer ties a lot of things together, and it's a strategic 100-year issue. So I think that we need to pay a lot of attention to that, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to do that, but I know we have to figure out a way.
Absolutely, and engage and involve as many people as possible. Corey, did you have?
Yeah, and I just wanted to be clear that when we say goal here, we're saying the goal is a discussion, a healthy discussion. We're not saying the
Correct.
goal is
Yes.
completing the plan.
Yes.
I just
Yeah.
want to be sure everyone knows, because I think we
Right.
get worried because
Right.
sometimes the cart's before the horse. But
I-
one thing
I'm
Right.
just,
no,
Corey, I'm just driving interest.
yeah.
Because if people aren't interested after that, there's no hope.
The one important thing, and this is community health related, is that, and town sewer is related to this, it's protection of our water supply in town.
Yep.
And we have recently, there have been some questions about, contamination of our water supply. And so that's got to be part of that conversation too, because our water comes from that 3A corridor. So, this is part of the larger discussion where we have to weigh all these things, and everyone should know exactly what's, the whole scope of what's going on.
Right, and this is the complexion of these master plan implementation pieces and committees is going to be really important to do that, because sometimes the sewer discussions and in the case of Chief Justice Cushing Highway, it impacts affordable housing, and so none of this is in a vacuum, and it can't be. And we, I think we have the partners in the Master Plan Implementation Committee. They're eager. That committee in and of itself has representatives from some of the key committees in town, and to the extent that we can add on other stakeholders to drive the discussion within the community, the better. So, to me, that almost answers all of our areas of goals for this year. Okay. Anything else on that one? And then we'll just talk about Paul. I see you.
Yeah. So the other thing which I think everyone probably understands is that we had the Little Harbor problem where the state really stepped in and pushed the town a little bit, when we don't want to be in that situation either. We want to come up with good ideas, good options long before we are forced to do anything. So, whether it's Elm Street and how to develop that, or how to design it safely, or the consideration of a regional sewer system or connection, we really have to keep that in mind as well, because we can come up with good ideas and we can come up with great designs and all the information. We want to be certain that we can do it on our own without having a lot of input from the Commonwealth demanding what we don't want. That's all.
Carrie, would you like to read that? We have a comment from somebody in the meeting.
I was ready to do that. Rob Jeffers, who has already said his address. I think if you frame it in how it impacts people, you will get a lot of participation. Our water is expensive, so a meeting on that will bring a lot of interest. As Diane said, sewer impacts affordable housing. I think people would be really interested, not a question, just a point. And I agree, a lot of pros and cons to all of these. I don't think that it's, all of it's not all clear cut, and we need to flesh it out as a community.
Right. And again, we have a responsibility to raise it up the flagpole. And these are topics that are long past needing a wider community conversation. Chris, do you have sort of a summary of each of these? Oh, well, we didn't go to 3. Sorry, financial. Obviously, we discussed, finances and our budget message for next fiscal year, and all of that is always one of our primary roles and responsibilities that we charge Chris with, putting together a budget. But we felt like, given the extraordinary circumstances we're in right now, the uncertainty of what's going to happen, the fact that all of our collective bargaining unions are, this would be the year that we would be negotiating contracts effective July 2021. all of that is just normal operating procedure clouded or challenged by a lot of unknowns. And so we basically made a commitment as a goal to make sure that we are getting, you know, as many updates and trend reports and really drill down on some of the trending financial, both revenues and expenses over the next couple of months and until we have a little bit of clarity. Our budget message is usually drafted at the end of August, and we will just start discussing it and adopt it by September, which is just sort of the policy that we set for ourselves so that Chris can go on his way to build the budget for FY22. I think I said that wrong earlier. Anyway, we're going to have to stay on top of that and make sure that, you know, we have enough information at various touch points in the schedule to, you know, give some clear direction in terms of the next budget, particularly as we go forth with unions and just who knows. So we're going to make a commitment to staying on top of this and pulling whatever ripcords we need at whatever time. Make sense? Paul?
Yeah, so I can't underemphasize the effects that this is probably going to hit the town, not this year, but next year. And I'm hopeful that, you know, we'll come out of the economic hit that we took both statewide and nationally as time goes on. But, you know, I mean, I've never worked so hard and been under such demand, and, you know, pay cuts, I never thought it happened. And this is going on all around town, all around the state, all around the country. And it really is a broader economic hit that is going to be, you have to look at over the course of the next 6 months. I'm sure the state budget is going to be limited on what they can give to the towns, and we don't get a tremendous amount, but we're going to have to mid-year readjust as we always do, just in case. We've got good reserves, but, you know, it's a really this is a tough time for the town and for the state and for, you know, for the country, you know, economically.
Yeah.
Not to mention everything else.
In addition to the pandemic, in addition to the pandemic, there's also obviously, you know, some likely political unrest coming forth, no matter what happens in November or September, for that matter. Jack, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think we have to assume that there'll be less money coming from the state, and Cohasset will not be high on the list of communities receiving funds. I do think that, you know, in order to evaluate a situation, it's good to see exactly, most of our expenses are payroll, and I think we really should take a look at the payroll of, say, 10 years ago, and the list of employees of, let's say, 10 years ago. It's a round number, and as of today, so we can get a feel for what we're really looking at, because that way, if we do have to take some action, we'll at least have some background. So I don't know if, Chris, if that's something that you could find out for us.
Yeah, the budget report, but I know the CAFR for sure. The back CAFR actually has an employee count over the years. I think it goes back 10 years, so it may actually already be out there. One of the things that's really important to note, though, that in the last 7 years has been a fairly radical change in the town's perspective, right? So there was no planner, there was no HR, and there was no IT. So what's changed fundamentally, at least in the time I've been here, is an emphasis on professional services that didn't exist before. So it's kind of, so while the raw numbers are most certainly already there, how people are allotted are very different, and again, even more so radically in the last 7 years. In order to do all of these things that you're setting up as goals, you need to have people implement them, and that's a planner. The town didn't have a planner. There was no HR. There was no IT. If we didn't have IT, we wouldn't be on this platform right now. So again, I just think there's a context, and I'm happy to try to provide all that, Jack, whatever you're looking for.
No, we're not discussing about the need for that. We're just saying, what's the data, what are the positions that have been created, what's the pay, and all of that. And it's not just the new hires or that, but it's the other part of that, because if we are going to have to do with it, the first thing that you want to do is have an idea of what the scope of the, and I don't want to say problem, the scope of what we're dealing with. And then, yes, clearly there's been a lot of different people been hired and positions created. But asking for the data is not an editorial comment about the validity of that. It's just getting the data so the select board can better do its job.
I think if we can see trends, I think we're going to be dealing with other bigger issues, you know. So I to Chris's point, I think the CAFR has some of that information just in terms of general head count, and you know, we can look at that when we look at the budget message, which will necessarily extraordinary circumstance that we're in or not, we're going to have to look at where discussions with unions are going and how you know, how the budget is going to be structured with some likely changes in our receipts. So you know, we can you know, do some general CAFR, maybe up, you know, look at that financial information as we discuss. Here's where we're at now. Here's where we see some challenges going, and you know, help us frame some of the priority areas.
Oh,
Carrie?
I'm not.
Just
I
another.
just want a list.
We
Sorry.
just had another resident question from Rob Jeffers asking what % of our funding is from the state.
It's about 8%, if I remember the numbers right, when you add everything up. And I'm talking about Chapter 70 unrestricted aid and the little bit of library aid and stuff we get. It's about 8%, if I recall the number right. And but again, that's also in the CAFR and in the budget report.
Yeah, you know what, I mean, one of the things let's put on maybe the meeting in August, we'll just do kind of a budget update, both, you know, sort of current and then just, you know, 5-10 year sort of trending as we start to grapple with putting together a budget message for 22. Great, thank you. Corey.
Yeah, I literally was just going to say that point, but you know, this is something that is top of our minds, and it's something that's changing so rapidly that we are fully aware, and we're, you know, we spend a lot of time in the meeting, and we're spending a lot of time on the sidelines learning about these different ways to address this, and it's going to get to a point, you know, that we're going to have to make a lot of changes on the fly. And I think one of the things we did talk about was, you know, presenting, you know, being communicative to the town about these changes. And that step one is that, you know, perhaps August kind of recap. And I love that idea.
Great. Okay. So are the members ready to make a motion on these three overarching goals, knowing in particular, Chris, that we're going to, you know, within the goals document, I would like to see a delineation of those top priority areas under healthy communities, so that they're not necessarily the execution, they're actually there in the goals. Does that make sense?
Why don't I circle back with Tracy as she pulls the minutes together so you can see that laid out under that goal for next week.
Okay. Okay.
As well. So if you want to adopt these tonight, that just says go, and then we'll come back with those layout. If you want to tweak it more, that's fine.
Okay, that's great. Anyone want to make a motion?
I'll take it. I make a motion to approve the selectmen goals as set forth in the presentation that was just shown to us by Mr. Senior.
Is there a second? Okay. All those in favor, roll call alphabetically. Jack.
Jack Creighton, I need a little clarification. I will vote for what we just saw, but if things are added later, that's not what I'm voting for. I'm voting for what we just saw, and that's what I think the motion was as the list was just presented. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Jack Creighton.
Yep.
All right. With that clarification, Jack Creighton votes aye.
Corey.
Sorry, Corey Evans, aye.
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Paul Schubert, aye.
Carrie Thompson, aye.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. The next is an update on Chris is going to walk us through a summary of how the professional services in town have been procured, and to discuss also sort of generally what some next steps might be in terms of issuing an RFQ for special counsel and counsel, more as a kind of a business thing. We're not going to discuss any specific individuals. This is more just about setting up a process and reviewing the process on the professional services for permitting boards, which we received a memo on probably a month ago or so. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Just Madam Chairman, a point of order.
Sure.
I believe this is on the agenda at the request of the Select Board on the minutes of July 14th. Is that correct?
I actually can't answer that because I don't have the minutes in front of me. But I mean, we did discuss, I think earlier in the spring, getting an understanding of how the professional services have been procured. And then also we've discussed, you know, where are we in terms of special counsel, and when were they approved by the board, that kind of thing. So we want to try to get in my mind, sort of, I'm thinking Excel spreadsheet eventually of, you know, who's, you know, which professional services we have, who are doing them, so that we can review them and see what next steps might need to be taken.
On that meeting that I referred to, if you refer to the tape, there was discussions, I think Select Member Evans started that, and there were two issues of having to do with the planning and the conservation, the engineering, and the legal services that have been assigned to them. And I believe at that time, and I believe the minutes will reflect, we asked for this matter to put on the agenda. Now that is not what I see on the agenda, and I believe that that the Select Board had asked for those things to be on the agenda. And I just think I need to point out, we'll probably have to go back to the actual tape of that to see if that was the sense of the board at that time. But that does not seem to equate with what you have on the agenda today. And that's why I'm bringing it up as a point of order. I'm not saying you don't proceed with what you have here. I'm just saying that this is not what the Select Board asked to be on the agenda in the July 14th. And I think we'll have to defer to everybody pulling the tapes up.
Well, I mean, or, you know, we can certainly address the comments from the 14th, you know, on a different agenda item. But my understanding is all along that we have discussed getting a sense of professional services for the town, whether it's engineering services that are advising other boards, and just understanding how that process works and who's engaged, particularly on the legal side of things, because there are a lot of special counsels. And I know, Jack, you and others have brought that up.
About a year, over a year ago, yes.
Right.
That
right.
has been brought up. Yeah.
So
is the town council here to participate?
He's not. I did talk to him earlier today, so he knows that we are discussing this. And it's really just in general trying to get.
Well, I just want to know, was he invited?
Yes, I talked to him.
You invited him?
Yes, I talked to him. Yes, this morning.
Well, no, did you talk to him or did you invite him?
Town council, you know, receives our agenda items. He and I communicated and had a very lengthy conversation. I told him he was welcome to join us.
Okay.
So, Corey, your hand's up.
Yeah, I mean, my apologies if my comments weren't too clear, or what I brought up in my selectman comments. The discussion about how we acquire professional services as they advise our boards is the exact conversation that I want to have, and I'd like to stop talking about the conversation and start talking about the actual issue. So if we can just kind of jump through whatever we're going through now and talk about what we're here to talk about, I'd appreciate that.
Thank you. I think I'll turn the floor over to Chris. We will listen, and then we can decide, what some of our next steps, so that everybody feels like they're getting the information that they're looking for. Chris.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Again, this is a follow-up to the conversation that the board had on the 14th, plus an extension of a conversation the board had last fall for an extended period of time that stopped without conclusion, and that's going to start up again tonight. So one of the responsibilities that's assigned to the town manager is chief procurement officer. There are literally millions of dollars spent every year here in Cohasset on goods and services, from public safety vehicles to W equipment, paper pens, and numerous professional services. And understanding and implementing procurement rules and best practices is a critical job. When I started at Cohasset, there was no staff assigned to regularly manage procurement, and no staff credentialed by the Massachusetts Inspector General. The IG runs a well-respected public procurement credentialing program, which I have participated in, earning the Certified Public Procurement Officer designation in 2016, and it was just renewed in 2019 for another 3 years. In 2015, I hired the town's first full-time procurement manager, a position now filled today by Michelle Leary, who's joining us, and by the way, she'll join us in the conversation in a couple of minutes. The position requires the IG's public procurement credential as well, and is responsible for coordinating Cohasset's procurement and contract management. So that's a little summary of kind of where we were and where we're here, without getting into gory details about what wasn't really working right. In addition to following black letter law regarding public procurement, we've also adopted best practices around areas like professional services that are not covered by formal bidding processes. Recently, the town procured professional engineering and environmental review services for the planning, permits, and inspections department. That's kind of the umbrella that we created 6 years ago that includes planning, zoning, conservation, health, and all of that under one umbrella. The process materials for which I have shared with the board already was defined, public, and professionally managed. And it resulted in the retention of 2 primary firms to serve as needed for major application reviews, ensuring that the work of the town's permitting boards is properly supported. There had been a firm that had been with the town for many, many years, and they were serving kind of as de facto planner for a lot of that time because there was no town planner. And that firm has kind of retired and moved on. And so it's not only a timely matter, but it was also the right way to do this. In addition, I know that the prior chairman of the planning board, Clark Brewer, had requested this for some time. He said, we really need to go out and procure professional services and do a open process. And so, the time was right, and we went out and we did this. And I know that this is primarily supporting the planning board, but not exclusively. They do the biggest, most complicated permits typically. And we have one of them is going on right now, as a matter of fact. So they were fully engaged in this process. Lauren and her team stayed in full contact. And again, I've shared those memos with the board. So that's the first big area of professional services. The next one, which needs the same type of defined public and transparent process as legal services.
Point of order, can we just go to the...
Oh, sure. I'm sorry, you have questions about this?
Yeah, it's 2 separate parts of the agenda, and I kind of want to keep them separate.
Got it. Sorry. So what we have now is 2 firms. I don't remember the names off the top of my head. Michelle might have them. And they're available now. They're retained and they've been vetted. So they've responded to the process. I think there were 7 firms that responded to the RFQ. There was a staff team that included procurement and public works folks and town engineer and folks from planning and permits. And they were able to narrow it down. So we have 2. Now that does not mean that we can't retain other firms as needed. There might be a small, there might be a stormwater issue that requires a niche firm or something. So clearly, if there's a service that's not available or provided, or if there's a conflict, sometimes a firm might be in conflict. There aren't lots of firms on the South Shore of Massachusetts. There's big ones and small ones, and sometimes you can be in a conflict. So you have to have the flexibility to pull someone else in for a smaller job. And it's really for technical reviews of specific items, or in the case of the project that's in front of the planning board today, a firm to assist, because that's such a big project with so many aspects. One person, the town planner, can't possibly do that all by herself. So that's what the services are for. Does anyone have any questions for me? By the way, Michelle is here. So.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you for joining us. I have a quick question, just in terms of like some of the permitting boards, if they need a specific technical expertise, engineering, somebody to look at something complicated, like Concom or zoning or something, what's the process for them to make that request for engineering services, which we have nothing to do with? And is that something we can help clarify for them if there is any gray area on that?
So typically what happens is this, the applications come in, so there's no particular surprise, right? So something will come in, for example, I'll use the Cohasset Arboretum only because it's big and it's very public right now. As that was coming in, it was clear it's a big application, it's very complicated, and it needed an additional set of eyes or multiple sets of eyes to help the planning board through its processes. That, in advance, the primary engineering firm, again, I think it's Weston and Sampson. Is that correct, Michelle? Yeah, again, of course, like you said. They were vetted, and actually it turned out they had a potential conflict, so it was good that it was all done in advance, right? They vetted it through, they worked through the planning council, and they put everything on the record, and everything turned out fine. The good news is that by having them in advance, it was all ready to go, they were all vetted, everything was clean, and they were able to jump in. So typically, in advance. And then again, if there's pre-approved, it makes it easy. Can they do the work? Are they available? Great. And if there's something that they're not capable of doing or there's a conflict, you can then reach out. We have a couple other firms on that list that were also vetted. Or if there's some other entity that's been used before that they can be pulled up to. And it may be necessary to even supplement this list. We might end up having to do a second list of smaller firms that maybe just do stormwater. I'm just making this up as an example, and that can be done as needed. So typically what will happen is you'll know in advance. You'll know that application X has a very complicated issue with stormwater, or in the case of Cohasset Arboretum, it has two issues, and it's wet, and it's on the waterfront, and it's complicated engineering with the underground parking and all. So what do you have and what do you need? So there's a larger firm and the smaller one's name I don't recall, and they actually just did a quick review of a set of plans.
It's Armory Engineering. Yeah,
there you go. So. And again, so that was all done. So they're there. And again, if there needs to be more, that's great. I mean, this is it, close the doors. This is aligning pre-approved firms so they're available.
I see.
Periodically to make sure that the firms, we keep a good, and again, Michelle can talk about this a little bit more in terms of why we do this kind of stuff. It keeps the relationship good. And it also makes sure that we have the services we need, because things have changed. One of the things that's clearly apparent, Cohasset's not a new community. It's people have been living here. I mean, the Native Americans living here long before any of us. But in modern times, people have built all over. What people are doing now, they're building on lots and areas that were not economically viable to do for a variety of reasons. Very complicated. Well, now the money's available to make those things potentially economically viable. People are willing to blast rock. People are willing to try creative ways of, assessing wetlands. Sometimes they're good, and sometimes a lot of times they're not. But these are complicated sites, so we expect to see more of these complicated reviews, simply because the areas that are being redeveloped or developed in the first place are marginal sites, things that people would never have touched before. But again, the money that people are willing to spend to do modifications is much greater than it used to be. So having these professional services is almost necessary. Our staff can do a lot of stuff, but when you start getting into the assessments of endangered species or some of the complicated other things that sometimes involve some of these parcels, it's good to have professional services available.
Corey, I saw your hand. Just to follow up on that, Chris, that's just an example of if there's if you need a naturalist or something because you're dealing with a Concom thing, is it that the Concom would collectively as a board determine through the conservation agent that, boy, I think we need to bring somebody in to help us kind of navigate through this, and then they would go to Michelle?
Well, in this case, I would go to Jeff and say, or would collaborate with Jeff, say, look, we really need somebody here. And then Jeff would work back and say, okay, we need to pull somebody. So if it's a small, like a one-off, that's a fairly easy procurement. Michelle's done a lot of those, and you work through. And again, if it becomes something that becomes more common, we can have a pre-approved list of people ready as well.
Right.
And we've done that before. That hasn't changed. If we need someone like that in a niche area, we can still. Yeah. And I think there's already. I don't think it's a list per se at this point, but I know there's firms that have been used fairly.
Right.
And this doesn't. I want you to understand the procurement that we did doesn't preclude that at all. This is primarily for the bigger jobs because those are complicated and and sometimes you're going to have an application that has planning and conservation and zoning.
Right, exactly.
They can look at the whole thing holistically is really important too.
Yeah.
So all the boards getting the same information.
Right, right. I mean, that's what I like want to get out of this tonight's discussion and on both of these topics is just understanding what the process is or what it could be, and then what our next steps are. Corey, you had a question?
Yeah, apologies for people at home. This is like in the weed stuff, and this is, could be really boring. My
We love
apologies.
it.
Super
I love
exciting.
it. Yeah,
That's
no,
exciting. I have a certificate on my wall.
I got a list of questions here.
We're all geeks. We're here. Yeah, thank you.
Chris, before we hired Mrs. Leary, you were the chief procurement officer for the town. Is that?
Well,
right?
I'm still a chief procurement officer. We had a woman before. We had a staff member before Michelle.
Okay.
Brian. So she was the first one we hired in 2015.
So Michelle
She's
is
gone
not.
to New Bedford.
She's the.
No. So I'm still the chief procurement officer, but so Michelle though manages stuff on a day-to-day basis. I mean,
Okay.
because of the work we're doing and the complexity of the projects and the procurements, we really need somebody to live this. And it's,
Right.
Michelle lives this most certainly, particularly in the world we're doing with COVID, right? So she does a lot of the day-to-day stuff, but we meet very often. Actually.
So, and part of that function in town, I assume that there's training and tell me about kind of, the qualifications for you to take that role, just so I understand it better.
Well, actually, the reality is there's no requirements at all. I mean, so I'm the first town manager who has to actually have this certificate, and a lot of my colleagues don't. So
Okay.
I thought it was incumbent, since there was no one else here who had it, to take the classes. And by the way, all of you can do it too if you want it. I think it was 60 hours over 3 weeks. You had to do 4 days, three different sessions scattered over months, and it was tested. I actually was doing a Scantron form test. So and then you have to pass the test. I forget if it's a 70%, Michelle. I forget what the numbers are now.
Okay, but the
yes, there's a very robust training program, and then there's specialty programs, and then internally, we've done some training with staff because, one of the things when we kind of put these new things into place with Michelle's predecessor, there were best practices like making sure we had insurance for all the snowplow drivers. We had been doing that for decades. And that means if somebody knocks down somebody's mailbox, okay, we're paying.
Right.
And
so specifically on the two, on Weston and Sampson Armory Engineering, tell me just a little bit. I know it was a process or whatever. Give me a little bit of a bullet point of what made these two stand out. I do know that there was as you said, a conflict of interest in one. I do want to hear a little bit more about that if we're allowed to. Just give me a quick brief overview of the process to choose those two firms.
So I was not involved in the details of this. That's one of the things that Michelle worked on with them.
Okay. Yeah, great.
So Michelle.
Sure. So the process was that the planning director came to us and said, we need to procure these professional services.
Planning director being Lauren Lind, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
And Jennifer Oram. And while they're exempt from the 30B procurement, we do have a longstanding practice of following that rule. So they gave desired specifications as to what they'd like to see in their engineering firms that were chosen. We then put that in the spec. We put it out to bid. We sent it to several different firms. Like I said, we had 7 people respond to that. From that point, we had an internal group that consisted of myself, one of the town engineers, Jeff Summers from Conservation, and I believe there was another that's escaping me now. We fill out a criteria sheet based on their minimum qualifications, and we score them. And based on the scoring system, that's how we choose the top 2. So that's how that came about. But what I want to also say, and Chris touched on this, is even though we chose Armory and Weston and Sampson, that was just 2 we chose at the time as a pre-qualification. There's nothing that precludes us from choosing additional people who responded to the RFQ as well. They were just the 2 that we could pre-qualify, that met all of our needs. So that's why we extended to them.
Are those scoring sheets something that you share publicly, or are those typically privately held in the file folder somewhere?
So we hold them in the file folder, but everything from procurement, once it's awarded, is public. So anyone's welcome to look at the file at any time. Okay.
And then could you expand a little bit on the conflict of interest, or is that something that we typically don't bring up in an open forum?
It wasn't a a huge conflict. I don't know if it's something that I want to bring up in an open forum.
Well, it was actually brought up in an open forum, Michelle, so at the planning board. So yeah, so it was publicly discussed, Corey. So what happened is, and again, I wasn't in the meeting either, but Weston Sampson is a very large company and they have many divisions. And one of the divisions actually runs wastewater plants, and they ran it at BlackRock. And one of the owners of the Crescent Hospitality Partners who's making this application, Mr. McGoldrick, built BlackRock. He doesn't own it anymore. So they self-identified that.
Okay.
And the group that's doing our work doesn't do that work, right? They're different. So they self-identified, it was vetted, it was just publicly disclosed. And then the council, Karis North from Murphy Hesse, looked at it as well. So it was all publicly disclosed, and it was open to public comments and from the board at the opening of the hearing. And to my understanding, there were none. So it was fully, there was no conflict in the end, but it was important to disclose that it even was investigated. So that's one of the reasons that having somebody pre-qualified is helpful, because you can identify things early on. And in a big firm, and we're a comparatively small region, all things considered. It's important to be able to do that kind of qualification check and that any kind of conflict check. Lawyers do this too.
Right. And one more question, and then, I'll finish up my laundry list here. My apologies for going on. Just so I kind of understand, like, the function of what this would do. And I've listened and all this thing. So, for instance, if I'm on the planning board and someone is making an application and there's something on that application that I'm not sure about, whether it's a setback or I think you brought up the point of wetlands, this is how a board would, basically get the, I don't want to say ammunition, but the true legal guidance on whether or not an application is, even applicable to discuss. Is that kind of the role of this service?
Well, in this case, these are professional services to analyze the technical aspects, Corey. It's not legal per se.
Sorry, wrong word.
Yeah, yes. So, and again, some of the stuff, setbacks and stuff are comparatively vanilla as this goes.
I don't know much about it, so I just
no. Believe me, I understand. No, these are good questions.
Okay.
But it could be more complicated. Like in this case, there's technical specifications when you're building on the water, and there's Chapter 91 issues that need to be assessed, and then the building itself to assess it from a building code point of view and also a design point of view. And there's again, I think there's traffic issues on the site. There's again there's drainage. So that gets kind of complicated. These firms have engineers, other specialists who can analyze as parts of the project.
So, is their focus, primarily expertise in like the state and federal, like building code, or is their focus more advising on our own bylaws?
It's really advising, I think, on more technical aspects, like, things like drainage, right? Is this drainage system actually going to work? Is this, are these materials compliant with our green build? If we had a green building code, is it? Again, there's actually an energy code. Are anything they're doing match the energy code?
So it's pretty, like, I don't want to say in the weeds, but it's very specific in engineering. Yes. It's not really so much for bylaw, whether it's within the realms of our own towns, things. That's more in the realm.
Legal.
It's more legal. Okay.
Yeah, and that's more technical. That's more, that's stuff that happens fairly regularly. Okay. This is for much more complicated projects that have technical issues that have to be assessed that are beyond the scope of what we normally do. Okay. And again, there could be, the question I'm bringing is around the water. There's that Chapter 91 issue and what has to go where. And if there was a lot of big conversation in the harbor plan about Chapter 91 generally. When you have a specific project, you have to make sure people understand the rules and how it all works together. And this is the first project of its kind that's happened in Cohasset, so it's important to have people who can analyze waterfront development too.
Okay.
I know in the past, and I think Jack probably knows more than I do about this, but just sometimes if people are building in wetlands, there's marine issues, or there's bird issues, or there's some wildlife issues that need certain expertise on, and that might not be the two firms that are kind of in our on hold, but there are matters that come up in these permitting that require various, expertise that we just don't have internally or even on the board.
Yeah,
and some of it is,
Michelle,
some of it is, I'm sorry, and some of it is, by the way, analyzing an engineering presentation, or in the case of conservation, our plan makes everything perfect. Well, it might not make everything perfect. The mere fact that you paid someone to say it makes it perfect doesn't make it perfect. So you need someone on your side to kick the tires and to pull it apart and say, well, we looked at it as well, and we don't think that's the case. You know, and again, so when you hire somebody from the town, they're paid. I hate to call them being professionally skeptical, but that's what we want someone to do. We want someone who's representing the town's interests and say, hey, you know, is this really compliant? Does this really work? What are the flaws? And that's why you have outside professionals. And we also, by the way, we have a little bit more internal support for certain projects. This is stuff that gets a little beyond our scope.
Carrie?
We have a comment from resident Amy Glassmeyer. Amy, just share your address real quick when you can. She asks, I quote, "Can you provide the rationale for why the planning board chair was not involved in the review of the consultants? In the past, when we were hiring consultants, the planning board chair was part of the vetting process. Given the large scale of the harbor project, was there a reason why a planning board member wasn't involved in the final selection decision? Thank you."
I don't have an answer for that.
I don't have an answer for that either.
Yeah, no, I mean, we you know, this is for, when we've had very project-specific retentions, we sometimes involve committee members, like, for example, the Town Hall Building Committee has been involved in all of the reviews of all of the consultants that were hired because they're working so closely with them. In something like this, again, remember, the planning board was kept fully in the loop. They were given memos and briefings, and they were able to ask questions and engage. So it wasn't like they were kept out of the loop on this. These are for long-term. I mean, West End and Sampson wasn't hired solely for the Cohasset Marine project. It happens to have been applied for the Cohasset Marine project because it was clear that we needed somebody because this is a big project. But this is for more longer-term support. It wasn't just for a one-off. You know, I don't have any objection at all to involving boards and committee members when it's helpful and appropriate. In this case, the planning board was kept in the loop, and you know, I didn't hear any concerns expressed back to me. I mean, Lauren's pretty close to, fairly plugged in and to the board and really communicated. And Clark was the chairman when this was done. I didn't hear any feedback from him to me about anything. Again, if somebody wants to be involved, we just have to also make sure there's no conflict for them too, right? We don't want them to be in a place where they've retained somebody. You have to do an extra, you know, we don't retain anybody here, right? We're just doing it for the good of the town. So we've done it before. We've absolutely involved board and committee members, in this particular case, I don't think when the board was briefed, I don't know if the planning board chair asked to. You know, there was no purposeful exclusion to my knowledge. It was just they were briefed, but there was no one asked to be part of it.
You know, I think it's an important comment, and again, back to our goals and objectives to do everything we can to, you know, I mean, the day-to-day operations and the procurement of services lie, you know, for the most part in almost all instances with the staff and the town manager, who by Town Manager Act is the chief procurement officer. Having said that, it's like trying to sell anything or bring anything forward. The more, you know, the more voices that understand the process and are brought in to certain decision-making milestones. You know, we just need to be thoughtful about that as we look toward, you know, bettering engagement, involvement, and making people feel. Sometimes it's just like what we're doing tonight, which is just reviewing how things get done, because that answers a lot of questions, and then you're able to say, well, you know, is there a better way of doing it? And I think we have to be honest to that need going forward. Carrie?
We have 2 more resident comments, and then I had a separate comment, but let's let our voters go first. Okay, Amy just responded by saying, my understanding is that Eve Tapper is solely to service the board as part of the harbor review. And
yeah,
then
so let me take one at a time. Is that okay?
Yeah,
So because of the complexity of the management of this process, we've brought on an assistant for the planning department. Eve Tapper is a professional planner. She worked in Lexington and served as our interim planner between Mr. Matchuk and Mrs. Lind. And so Lauren came to me and said, look, we're getting overwhelmed here. We're going in a lot of directions and we need some help. I said, go out and see what you can find. And Eve was available. And she's done a lot of big projects in a lot of other towns. And she actually worked with us on the church mouse application. She happened to be here during that period. So she actually, her first day, she went out and talked to a lot of local business owners. She was amazing. She went right into the field. So she's a professional planner, and her services were retained to help with this particular project. But yes, Amy, thank you for clarifying. There's also a separate, just for this project, assistant because of the number of people to stay in touch with, the number of questions coming in. She's assigned to this project just to help maintain the management of it because it's so big. Because Lauren still has day-to-day stuff to do, right? There's still master plan stuff, and there's still routine applications that come in. So Eva's there to help to make sure that the big application, and again, be clear, the Quasit Arboretum is the largest project to come in front of the planning board in at least a decade, right? Or more than that. So it deserves every resource. And I knew you had another question.
Yep. And then Jack, I think your virtual hand is up too. I can see it. I don't know if that's a
Well, yes, it's been
all
up
right,
for.
let's finish. Okay. Jay Pampari has another question saying, who is paying for the engineering fees when there is a review? On Concom, the applicant pays. How is that being handled with the harbor?
To best of my understanding, there's also provisions in the planning board, some rules as well, so that when the town needs to retain additional engineering services, the applicant is charged for those services. That's my understanding. There's a provision in the rules that allow the town to say, look, your project's complicated. We don't have the internal resources. We need to hire some. And that's for like the big stuff, Weston and Sampson and stuff.
All right, and then I have one quick point. My point's a little bit broader, and Michelle, Chris, you can weigh in. Maybe we need to include Miriam on this, but when it comes to, our hiring practices and getting procurements, getting bids, hiring people, I would like to look at how we can get a more diverse pool of applicants and a diverse pool of voices. And, I know that a lot of times you don't necessarily get much diversity with the applicants, right? But we want diversity of thought. We want diversity of gender, race, all that stuff. So if there's a way that we can talk more in general about ways that we as a town can maybe expand or improve on how we're doing hiring and getting bidders and applicants in, I think that would be part of, a big, broader discussion that we can have.
And to separate the two, the hiring being part of the whole, the bigger inclusive goal. There are requirements, Carrie, in like, for example, should project become approved, there's minority minimum business requirements that need to be met as part of the so those are all part of the bid packages and all part of the rules that we have to follow. And Michelle can talk to you more about that either now or offline.
Okay, Jack, do you want to?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. A couple of things to Mr. Pampari's question, who pays? That's a good question. I know in the initial harbor plan, there's a series of grants. I don't know whether the town paid. I think there was some, but I'm not sure. But that's a question that I think these types of hearings that we're having now, that we need to find out who is paying for that. And when we get down to it, it appears that the selection is done by the town manager, town procurer, not by the actual boards. Now, having spent a lot of time on conservation for a number of, I think, 10 plus years, and a lot of that was as chair, I know the practice was that the Conservation Commission made the determination of who they were going to select. And they would interview various people, and typically the chair or the vice chair would do that. If it went over $10,000, it had to go through the procurement, but that's a mechanical thing to make sure it's compliance. With the planning, I think that one of the things we should keep in mind is that if we empower and ask people as citizens to serve on these boards, then they really take it seriously. There's a lot of work. I mean, 15, 20 hours. Amy's now the chair, at least 15, 20 hours. I think they need to be the ones in the driver's seat to make the decision, because they ultimately are appointed or elected and they're responsible. So I think what we should be talking about conceptually is the role of the management function as epitomized by the town manager and his staff, which is a managerial carrying out the wishes of the executive function, the people's function, which in a select board, planning board, conservation commission. And I think that we really need to make sure that those people who we ask to run these boards, they should be making these decisions and they should be getting the support. And by the way, we appreciate the support of Michelle and all the other people and Mr. Senior in facilitating that. And that's very important. But ultimately, we need to look to the boards and commissions to be given the authority, because they have the responsibility. And I know we did that with conservation, and it worked very well. So that, you know, that's really my concern on all of this, that we make sure that people understand that we empower those applicants. I mean, not applicants, the people who serve on our fellow citizens.
So if I may, Madam Chair. So I agree, Jack, that engaging the committees for their needs is really critical. That said, procurement rules and all are far more complicated, and the town had none of that before, right? So all of you had to step into the breach and do things because there was no one else to do it. And you all did a great job with the knowledge you had. I sat through that training because it was critical to do because no one had done it. I learned a lot of things, and a lot of stuff I don't even know. And Michelle lives this every day and knows there's a lot of things that could catch you, and you're trying to do the right thing and you do it wrong, not because you intend to do it wrong. So we're there to make sure the process and the rules, you know, if you're a conservation expert and you're on the conservation committee, we want to support you in every way you can, but you're not going to know the ins and outs of public procurement.
And that's your role.
So our role is to make sure that there's a clean process and the procurement's done right. And again, so we do most certainly want to engage, and we most certainly have. And again, if we need to do additional procurements, happy to do it. And we want to make sure that the boards and
exactly.
So that said, the committees can't make the decision all by themselves. I mean, but collaboration is critical, and we've done a lot of it. And you know, anytime that we can do more of it, we're happy to do so.
Well, I think the planning that perhaps there was the ball was a little bit dropped, because I don't think that the planning board really was participating in this. And let's not look back, let's look forward. And what I'm trying to say is that your technical things that you can do is important, but the direction of what you want in the policy comes from the boards and commissions, and you are empowered, and you or a professional will have the expertise and the knowledge of the intricate rules. It's like if you're dealing with an investor, you have to know the details behind it, but the investor makes the decision. And I think that the planning needs to be knowing, and conservation needs to be making those decisions. And your role is to back them up and make sure that they can do it consistent with the rules and regulations. So we agree.
And I just want to thank you for that. I just want to be clear that the planning board, it was on their public agenda multiple times, and they were given memos. So there were public discussions about the sole procurement and the whole process. So that said, we always want to go the extra mile. Happy to go the extra mile. Just want to be clear that the planning board was fully engaged in this process the whole way through. So
we want to look forward.
Yeah, no, we do
forward, and let's go forward.
We want to do it better.
Yeah.
We want to do it.
And this is exactly what this conversation tonight is intended to do, so that we can see.
And
did I mute myself? Everything that, this is what I was hoping tonight would do, was to just get this, for us to understand the process, for us to understand where, you know, where we can better enhance it, not only to enhance the process itself, but to accomplish some of the things we've been talking about all night, which is getting more people engaged, feeling like they're involved in everything that we do. And, you know, we do have staff expertise, to the earlier discussion about personnel, you know, so I think this is all stuff we can look forward to in terms of addressing, and with working groups, or however we decide to structure that, so that we can move these conversations forward. Corey, I know you wanted to say something.
I think Corey's done a good job.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, you know,
yeah,
I think, you know, Amy is uniquely qualified as a subject matter expert, and
yeah,
I would love it if we could just get her feedback And I'm guessing it's just a, hey, this is great, but it sounds like she, might not have been fully, engaged in the process. If you guys could just circle back, show her the decision, I think that would go a long way. The second thing is, just to reiterate, always, if you could, shade on the side of including a board, even if it's a little bit onerous, because, we can be all over the place, but getting somebody involved, whenever possible. I don't think that's codified. Maybe we want to, I don't know, future on, but going forward, just always try to include someone on a chair of a board.
And just to that point, because it can be onerous, especially if it's, a full board discussion when the full board has, more to do than they can even deal with. But this is something that I did talk to Paul Durensis about, or we're going to flesh it out a little more, which is basically like what can subgroups of individual boards do, and how do you structure, like with the master plan implementation, how do you cross board form groups, and who else can you bring in? So I think all of this kind of structural process stuff is really important. Corey, I thank you for, jumping in as the freshman on this team and asking these questions. There's no question that we shouldn't be at least willing to kind of explore. And I think we're going to come out, better on the other side. So I appreciate that.
And by the way, just to talk about the training first, we actually brought in, and Michelle can talk more about this, we brought in somebody from the Inspector General's office last year. We did a regional training. We invited all the boards and committees. And we had, I don't know, what did we have, Michelle? A couple dozen people from 6 or 7 communities.
We had about 28 people join.
Yeah, and it was like the committee members' guide to procurement. And we did it last year, and
I was there. Yeah, it was good.
And we invited our neighbors. And it's, as you say, Corey, it's not the sexiest subject of the world, but it was helpful. And the guy who did they spent 2 or 3, I think it was 3 or 4 hours.
It was long.
It was long. Were you at it? Did you go to it? Yeah.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. So it was, but it's important. And we're happy to do more of those. I mean, we did it on a regional basis because we're not going to have 28 people from class. As exciting as the subject is, who want to go to that. And we'd love to do more of that kind of regional training. So, and that's just an example. I had almost forgotten about that. So, it's complicated, but the more, we want to be as transparent as possible with this stuff and get people to understand so that you can see when there might be an issue, so we can identify it before it really becomes a bad issue, right? So, and if we're done with this piece, I'll just want to pivot to the next. Are we covered on this?
Sure. Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So one of the other areas that we've been talking about for a while is legal services. And I want to be clear about this right from the beginning. Running a process doesn't mean you're getting rid of what you have. And again, Michelle's going to talk more about this in a second about this whole what this is about is getting the boards, and again, in this case, by the way, the selectmen make an appointment of council and councils, right? That's what you folks do. It's my job and it's our job collectively in staff to get all of the relevant information so you all can make the very best decision. And so when I started, we had one firm that did it all. And quite frankly, I had some board members pushing me to make changes then. And I said, I'm brand new. I said, I think we just got to stay with what we've got and go. And it, because of a lot of history and all that, and it served us well. 2 years ago, things changed rather radically when Deutsch Williams broke up. And that had been the go-to firm for pretty much everything the town was doing. And it broke up, and not only did it break up, the long-term environmental lawyer left entirely and went to a whole different world. I think he's actually in public practice now. And the labor council, we had a great labor council, he left the firm. And then about 6 months or a year before this even happened. And then the entire labor department left Deutsch Williams. So there was no more labor councils. So we were going into negotiations with all the unions, and we had that Smith Place development. So we were stuck. So we had to go and quickly procure a couple of firms, and that came in front of the Board of Selectmen. And we did a labor firm, and we did a special counsel on land use and environmental. And that was 2 years ago. And my long-term plan was always to go back and to reset this, right? And the day-to-day stuff, it's easy to let those things just, you have something in place that's working, you just keep going, right? It's because there's always something else coming to you. So last year I said, hey, can we pick up the conversation about council, just get it clean? And again, it doesn't mean we're going to change. It doesn't mean it's going to change. It's just, what are we doing? How are we doing it? And it's gotten more diverse. We have, again, I'll have more of this for you officially. I have some of the numbers and stuff, and I want to put in a little nicer memo. We have 2 primary firms right now. And I've kind of evolved to where I think it works better to have a best of breed as opposed to one big firm, because there aren't many firms that do it all anymore. There just aren't. KP Law is one of them, and we've used them before. But last fall, we went through the board, for all of you who were on it, I know you weren't, Corey, there was a long conversation about what the role of municipal council is and the different versions of it. And there's some materials which I think we could share with you, Corey, that came from like the Jim Blanky's part of the Municipal Lawyers of Massachusetts, gave us a lot of great stuff. So we could share that with you, and I know all of you have it. I can recirculate it to all of you. And we got to the point of understanding the different options, and then we stopped. And there were a lot of other things going on. And at the time, the board was like, we just don't want to deal with this right now. So I think it's important that we pick up that conversation so that you can all give clear direction to me, and also so we can just get this clean, because this has gotten a little fuzzy. And again, I'm ultimately responsible for making sure the contracts are clean. So we have firms, we need to clean this process up. And if the board wants to keep all these councils, that's great. And if the board wants to slim it down, that's great. If you want to look at more diversity and different viewpoints. So the point of this process, and I'm going to turn over to Michelle now, is just to get that information, to get it out there and pull it together so all of you can make the best informed decision. And we should do it from time to time. And after we do this, I'd like to do bond counsel and financial advice. We haven't done that in a million years either. And there's not a lot in Massachusetts. That said, why not kick the tires and see what else, and just, again, reset the relationship. And then we're going to have to, in a year or two, do that with the auditor. Powers and Sullivan are great. And we may stay with them, but we should do an RFQ process for that as well. So let me turn this over to Michelle to talk a little bit about the process. And unless Corey has a question that you want me to answer.
Just before Corey goes, I just want to be clear that Michelle's going to kind of walk us through what we could do or might do, or what looking at legal services might involve, because if we were to put out an RFQ, which we're not going to be voting on or deciding today, but if we were, what would the process be, to our earlier conversation, in terms of, now we are the ones that hire legal counsel. However, it's those relationships are managed by staff. So there's still a lot of conversations that we are going to have about, what are the steps, and a lot of that conversation is not going to happen tonight, but we want to be able to involve, do it right, and get, the people on the committees that work with various counsel. Ultimately, it's our decision, but again, it has to be, they're managed by staff, and we want the input from others that work closely with, frankly, there's a lot of committees that work closer with some litigation counsels than we even do, because we're checking in a few times a year, but some of these other matters creep up on the committee level a little more frequently, like ZBA, planning, and Concom. I'll turn it over to Michelle, and we'll go for, oh, sorry, Corey. Yep.
Yeah, it's okay. So I want to just bring this up. Unfortunately, the RFQ that you guys sent over wasn't in the packet. We only got it, I don't know if you guys know, but we got it literally 2 minutes before the meeting started.
Yep.
My concern here is that, as you can tell, I like having a lot of stuff, going through it line by line, knowing what I need to ask before I get into a conversation. And I fully want to hear about this, but I feel like if Michelle talks now, I'm not going to be able to absorb it or process it, because I don't have my feet on the ground yet with this. So I definitely want to hear the overview, and I like what Chris said about why we need to do this yet, but I don't want to get too technical, because this is brand new to me.
Thank you, Corey, for actually framing what I was trying to say, which I really just want the overview, because I haven't, I didn't even realize we got it before the meeting, because I was having technical difficulties. So I'll turn it over to Michelle, and just to give us an overview of how and what, or whatever you're prepared to do. And then, we won't have too much discussion tonight, because to Corey's point, we don't feel prepared for that. So.
Okay, fair enough. So I was asked to pull together an RFQ for legal services, and what this would encompass is all legal services rendered to the town in the aspects of town council, labor and employment, environmental and land use, litigation, and special counsel. This one RFQ addresses all of those topics. High level, we would follow the same 30B process, even though legal services is exempt. Much like the other professional services we spoke about. We would follow the 30B process to make sure that our our process is transparent. We obviously want to redefine expectations, and we want something competitive. We want to be able to send this out to several firms and see what we get back. I know I've heard many of you speak on tonight's call about our existing town council, and this doesn't preclude existing town council to bid on this, or anybody for that matter. There are different sections for each category, and we're inviting them to bid on all or any that they feel more skilled at. In the process is the RFQ would hit the street as soon as it's approved and everyone's taken a look at it. We would have any of the qualified law firms or attorneys, come back to us with questions, and those questions would come back to the town staff for about a week. We would definitely vet them with everybody that we've identified to be on the committee. And then we're shooting for the proposals to actually come back to us by September 9th. And then we would screen and interview the candidates. And when I say screen the candidates, we have that scoring mechanism again. So each law firm would be scored based on their skills and ability to do the certain tasks at hand. We've identified internally some people who use legal counsel quite often to help score. And from what I'm hearing from everyone tonight, maybe we do include a couple of different board members or committee members to help us with this process. But ultimately, Diane, you hit on it, the decision is ultimately yours. So the final interview process after we narrow down the candidate pool would come before you to interview the candidates and then make a final selection. So that's how it's framed today. If there's anything you would like to see differently, or if you would like some input as to who should be on the committee, I think those are all.
So a couple of things, and then Corey, I saw your hand. One of the things that we have asked for, and I think I would like to see it before we get too far into the weeds on how to structure the RFQ process is, and it can just be in a spreadsheet form. And I know, Chris, I believe you were working on it. It is sort of, where we are, general legal services, which is like your primary care doctor, is, Paul DeRensis, and then, where is his, when was his last contract,
Sure.
et cetera. And then just drill down on all the various councils that are out there. I mean, and a lot of times we have, the sewer commission is working with, and we, and they'll come to us to get appointed as special counsel. But frankly, there's probably 12 attorneys in my mind that are working to some degree on behalf of the town. So I really want to understand the landscape of who's providing services now, what their, when they started, what their contract with us is, and then help, because I believe we need to know that right now in order to understand what we actually might need. And, a lot of things have changed, and they do change. This is a fluid organization, what our legal needs were 10 years ago are very different than they are today, and are going to be different than what we're going to need in the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. And I think we need to just slowly make sure we do this carefully so that we all feel, again, included and understand the complexity and kind of the full universe of legal services for the town of Cohasset.
Sure.
Corey? Chris, you want to?
Yeah, I just want to
that?
follow up on so I want to give you the primary counsels, and again, for example, with Brooks and Durensis, this for attorneys we deal with on a regular basis for different topics. Michelle, for example, deals with Rod Hoffman fairly regularly on procurement issues, and he's also been assigned to work with Sue, so he's been doing that. And again, that was Paul's assigned Rod to the sewer piece, not us. And so I would give you the leads on each of the firms, because there are sometimes associates who do some work in the background who I don't ever meet either. They're in the bills, and they may be doing some research or something, right? So I think it'd be good to do that and to kind of give you each firm what they do and who's doing it.
You know, another thing that would be helpful too is to sort of define roles and kind of think about, and we can have input on this when we discuss it. You know, for example, you know, if somebody's on the planning board and they have a question about conflict, you know, the attorney sitting at the end of the table because they're in a contentious hearing, for example, is not necessarily the person they should be going to. So that we can actually do like almost like an org chart of, you know, what the communications trees are, where, you know, if people have questions about conflict of interest or things like that, you know, where do those go? You know, I think it's, you go to town council, you know, what's the process of that? Can anybody, you know, that's on a committee just pick up the phone and call town council? And, you know, my understanding is no, because that's something for us to manage. But I think we need to, you know, and I know I'm putting a lot more work on Michelle and Chris on this, but we need to understand that before we take any real action on whatever's next.
And again, I think, Diane, that underscores the issue that even I'm challenged by, is this has gotten very complex.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges is that, you know, there's been a lot of changing faces. You know, the firm, the folks at Brooks and Rensis I dealt with 7 years ago or 6 years ago are not the same people anymore.
Right.
And so I think it's important to be able to document that and also to understand the complexities of each individual firm, where are the complexities.
And to Jack's earlier point, I don't necessarily want to revisit, recorrect, you know, I want to know who's been with us for what, doing what, and also a real definition of what our needs are today and going forward. So Corey, I know you had your hand up.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my head. You know, the idea that we really need to understand what we have right now, and then we have to have a meaningful discussion about the structure, about where we want to be with this. When you have one firm, it's very easy. You have one point of contact. But if we're going to move, and I'm saying we are, but we have to consider if we move to multiple firms, as Diane said, if one firm does one thing, can they do something else? These aren't conversations we've had yet. So, you know, number one, you know, I want to reiterate that we need to get a grapple on what we have. The second one is just kind of a personal nit, and I don't want to be, you know, kind of a pain about this, but could we take the dates out of the RFP, just because I think that caused me a lot of stress to say, okay, well, we're already on, September. It's like, I hadn't even heard of this yet. I hadn't even learned about where we are yet. And to have a goal on there makes me uncomfortable. So let's just delete those.
Sure.
Make me feel
So
more
Corey, all that really was is to show you a time frame, a number of weeks in between the different
start to
pieces,
finish.
But yeah, so I will take them out.
The other thing that is going to be really important to this conversation is looking at legal services and really any services in the context of our goals and objectives. You know, when we talk about regional sewer, or, you know, the possibility of some kind of intermunicipal water sewer, the implications are huge, you know, and there are different areas of expertise and laws that we all need to know about. We need to understand that, you know, if you're talking about affordable housing, is that going to trigger something over here? So all of this, you know, we have to look at what we're working on, what our goals are, what we anticipate will be over 3 to 5 years, and then define where legal services are going to be needed within that, and then in the, you know, overlaid on what we have.
Paul had his hand up too.
I keep muting myself. Paul, sorry.
Oh, you know, one of the other things, I've only been on the board, you know, 6 years, and before that, the school committee. Many times there'll be a firm that we have that has a conflict of interest with any given issue. So I know on the board, I know of at least 2 where the firm we had a conflict of interest with something that came up, and we had to opt to a second firm aside from the one that was representing what we thought to be the final arbiter for the town, and we had to opt out. So that happened twice, I know, in my time here at least. It happened a couple of times in the school committee as well. So oftentimes there'll be someone that's, I wouldn't say appointed, but is deferred to because of conflict of interest, because the firm has contacts with, member of the board or member of someone in town or someone involved in the discussion. So that's the other thing that's out there.
I think, I don't know how I keep getting, somebody muting me, somebody have control. I also think we need to have a discussion about the timeline, because, for example, again, in the context of what our work program is for the upcoming year, Labor and Employment Council may be the first thing we need to look at, again, in the context of the whole. But, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on. If we need to start, dealing with negotiations with the bargaining units, we may need somebody in place sooner than we're able to. So we just need to be sensitive to the timeline on that as well, Chris, in terms of, do we do a full rollout, or, do we address certain things ahead of time? Jack, you had your hand up?
That's a very fair point, Diane, because you're correct. The labor issues may come at us first, and also in terms of, again, remember, there's no goal here to change anything. It's just to get a clear direction, right? And if you want to give clear direction, and again, changing, it's good to do them around, town meeting. You don't want to be changing council if you are going to around a town meeting, right? That's not a good idea. Labor council, you don't want to be changing unless there's some terrific reason for it in the middle of labor negotiations generally. So those are very fair points.
Yep, Jack's hand's up. Paul, your hand's up. Do you still have something to say? All right, Jack.
Yeah, couple of things. I was in the meeting, was actually run by Paul Durenza's town council, and he did a very good presentation about the options. You can elect to decide to hire different specialty firms. You can have a general town council, which is what we do now, who will do the things within different departments within their law firm, but they reserve the right, if they don't have the specialty or they feel somebody else would be better, they will do that. The role of the general counsel is to be the quarterback, to keep in control of everything, so they know that one law firm over here or one lawyer is doing something that conflicts with another attorney, like somebody from planning might have something that would conflict with Concom. And that was one of the things Paul Durenza gave us a very good briefing. I'm still concerned with all this, and it's been close to a year of kind of people get hired. I know that I have heard from various boards and commissions that they're suddenly announced that an attorney has been assigned to them. They have no input. They've not necessarily, I don't want to go into the details, but there's been some dissatisfaction. And what I've been asking for, and it's been done, and it's actually in the past clearly, is a list of all of the councils that have provided services to the town, and coupled with that, the copy of the public record Board of Selectmen at that time, now Select Board meeting, in which they were appointed, along with the very specific terms of their appointment. These are factual things, all right? And I don't know why I have to wait almost a year later and I haven't gotten the answers to that. And these aren't editorial things. These are just factual. Who was appointed, everybody, when they were appointed, a copy, not of minutes, because minutes can be fungible, shall we say, but the actual copy of the electronic thing when they're appointed. And I really want to make that request again. And I don't know why it's taken so long, but if we're going to discuss this, I think that's I'm making that request. Is that okay? Chris, can you get that for me?
Well, unless I missed something, that's exactly what the chair just said and what the board has requested as part of this process. So I just want to clarify a couple of things. It was actually Attorney Lampke who gave that intense description. It was not Attorney Durensis. Attorney Lampke is part of the Mass Municipal Lawyers Association, and he gave the extensive discussion about the different types. It was not Counsel Durensis. And you can go back and look at the tapes if you like to, but that's actually how it was done. Secondly, the town has not been operating under a single counsel for some time. In fact, it's been over 2.5 years because Deutsche Williams broke up. And when they broke up, they no longer were capable of providing all-in-one service, which is why we, on an emergency basis, had to bring on an environmental land use council.
I know.
Bring on, so I just want to be clear about that, Jack. So I just want to get it on the record.
Just asking for the documentation.
I'm clarifying the misstatements of fact you just made, just to be clear that the town has not been operating under a unity council for 2.5 years because Mr. Durensis' firm was incapable of providing the services. So, and again, I want to be clear. I want this to be clean. Okay, I don't want to operate under this format. I wanted to clean this up last year, and the board didn't want to do that. But again, I don't want to go backwards any more than you do. I want to go forwards. So we need to clean it up. That's what I want to do. You need to do an RFQ that's clean. I want to get you all the facts. And I got to tell you, as I've dug through, I can't find a return agreement for Brooks and Durensis. So I don't think the board, in fact, I'm pretty confident that Paul's new firm has never been officially recognized by this board. And it's,
So,
again, I don't want to get into depth about this. I want to give it to you, but I got to tell you, it's been disheartening to me because it's my responsibility to make sure this stuff stays clean. Some of this stuff isn't clean. So this is one of the reasons we got to clean it up. Not that, by the way, the council, time a council's been engaged, we've had a conversation in front of the board. That's the way it's worked. That said, things aren't as clear as they should be. We got to get them clean. It's been going on like this for
so Corey, I know you had your hand. I really want to move us forward in many ways, literally and figuratively, and be sensitive to our time. We I think are all in agreement that we need a little more information to work on so that we can kind of envision what next steps need to take place so that we do our best in terms of providing whatever services are going to best serve the town of Cohasset. So I will probably reach out via email to see if maybe we could find some time to have a meeting specifically about this, because given the enormity of things that are on our docket, I don't want to get bogged down. And this is really something that we need to spend a lot of time on and understand and read the information that we have, understand the list of councils that we have, and try to get together and do the right thing on behalf of the town of Cohasset going forward. So
I don't disagree with that. I've just made an informational request, and as we all know, that some other members of boards and commissions have been forced to go to the freedom of information route, and I don't wish to do that. But after a year's time of asking for information and not getting it, right? So that's something moving forward with how we're going to handle legal things. I agree with that. I think Corey has done a very good job bringing it forward and, explaining why we need to do this. And I think we need to do this. We need to understand it. I perhaps have a better understanding, but the whole board needs to do it and move forward. So these are not mutually exclusive, but I did make that informational request, and I will follow up on it.
And I think that's something that we all want and have that information so that we can, again, make the best decisions for the town of Cohasset. So, all right. Thank you, everybody. Great. All right. All right. So I'm going to move along. Thank you, Michelle, for hanging in there with us. And we will be back in touch. Okay, the next item is we had at our last full meeting, we had discussed, we had approved the calendar for the year, and Tracy reached out to everyone to see if how you felt about moving the August 11th meeting to August 4th. It appears that everybody that we heard from is available for the meeting on August 4th, which I actually feel better about because that is next week, and I really want to, get some of these master plan implementation committee discussions moving forward. So if somebody would be willing to make a motion on moving that the 8/11 meeting, rescheduling it to August 4th.
I move that we reschedule the August 11th, 2020 Select Board meeting to next week, Tuesday night, August 4th, 2020.
Is there a second? Okay. And again, in alpha order, starting with Jack.
Jack Creighton, aye.
Corey?
Evans, aye.
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Paul Schubert, aye.
Terry Thompson, aye.
Great, thank you. See you next week. Next is town manager update.
Okay, in the interest of time, I just want to give you two quick updates. One on a big project. If you have not been on the common yet, you should. The project is, I think, 95% done now. It's been paved, it's been striped. It looks really good. It's been seeded. They've been watering it today. Hopefully we won't have, I don't think we had any thunderstorms today, so we just got to keep it watered and get the grass growing. But it really looks tremendous. I know there's still more work to do. It's not 100% complete. There's some areas around the edges that we got to get done, but it really has, I think, improved the whole look of the common, and it's made it safer. There's new crosswalks and safer parking. So it's definitely been what the board was looking for, and I look forward to everyone enjoying it. People have been using the common, by the way, anyway. Well, it's become it was always for the place, it's going to be even more popular. So if you haven't driven by, please do. The parking boxes are in, it really looks good. And now it just points out how we have to do more. We need to go do the second part of the common and do some other work. And again, I want to thank Brian Joyce and the whole Public Works team who did a really great job overseeing this. So thank you, Brian and his team.
Chris, just on that particular thing, and again, it goes back to our goals about communication. A few people were, on Highland Ave, were kind of shut in for a few hours, and I know staff was having trouble getting to work on Friday. I mean, the inconvenience is there's not a whole lot we can do about that with these kinds of large scale projects. But again, we should spend time, the staff should spend time thinking about how best to get this information out so that people know ahead of time not to plan a brunch, on Sunday morning when their
It was
roads going to
Friday,
be
yeah.
closed. It was
No,
Friday.
it really became, that Friday, last Friday, which was my first day off in 4 months. But I did get calls and texts. Became a little bit of a challenge. So
Right.
I have to apologize for the inconvenience that it caused people.
Right.
The good news is that once the work's done, we shouldn't have to look at it for a long time.
Yeah. And if we all do our jobs right, we'll get a better communication system. It's very difficult because everybody wants the information in a different way at different times, but we can do better. So thank you.
And then one little piece of positive staff news. So Megan James, our librarian, gave birth to Finn, 8 pounds plus. So she is the proud mother of a second son. So congratulations.
Oh,
and our
congratulations.
husband, for the birth of Finn James.
That's terrific. Congratulations to her. Okay, selectman comment period. Jack?
I want to say thank you to all the kids who finally moved their bicycles away from the entrance to Government Island. They were all packed up there, and of course they're not supposed to jump on the bridge, and we have to understand the police have got to ask you to leave, so don't hate them too badly. But by moving your bikes away, you make it a lot safer, and I think the kids are pretty good. And I know it's been challenging, they've been hanging around and there's been social distancing issues and it's a real challenge, but you kids, you did all right. So you heard it from the select board. So you tell your parents you're good kids. Okay. Thank you.
I hope they're watching.
Well, if they're up this late.
Let's move. Thank you, Jack. Corey?
Yeah, I've been struggling with how to phrase this, but I mean, it seems like every day there's something new that's designed to separate us as neighbors, as Americans, as all these different things. And I constantly remind myself, and I want to remind everyone else out there to constantly be rejecting false narratives that are only trying to divide us. There is no us and them. We are all neighbors. We are all Cohasset residents. We are all Americans. We have way more in common than we have apart. And just keep that in your mind, because there's a lot of people out there trying to split us apart, and we're all on the same team. And let's be neighbors as much as possible.
I'll go next. I'm just going to say what he said. Thank you, Corey, for that. And, you know, and I think that goes for our world too, like our unit as a select board. I mean, it really is important that we communicate, and you know, I look forward to working this year with everybody, because there are some challenges external that we have no control over. And I think the better job we do leading, the better likelihood of all being happy and outside and gathering once again at some point in the near future. So thank you, Paul.
Yeah, so two quick things. One, I want to thank Bill Quigley at the very beginning of all of this. He, in the last open meeting I think we had before the Zoom adventures began, he said with the beginning of the pandemic that he was very worried, not so much about civil unrest or any trouble or things. He was worried about problems with drugs and alcohol, and, you know, the personal problems that people would have in their homes being locked up. And he was prescient. You know, the social interaction that we have, just look after your neighbor. You know, like Corey said, look after your neighbor, look out for them, make sure if they need some help them out. Because I think the social stress is exactly what Bill Quigley said. It's what he's worried about. So I wanted to kind of remind Bill that he was spot on. The other thing is that they're now looking for all of the gas pipelines up Sawyer Street. So they've been marching up the street slowly. They're at the top of the hill. So please be very careful coming up the hill. There are going to be road crews there. There's going to be police officers there and a detail. They're going to be digging holes in the road there. So please, please, please be very careful. There were people flying up the road this morning, and just be very careful. They'll be done in probably a few more days. Then the big work will begin once they found where all the gas mains are. They'll start digging it up. But just the next couple of days, just be really careful. That's it.
Do we have any of those electronic signs on either side of Sawyer to, you know, especially other than the French one outside of Paul's house?
Yeah, generally, Diane, when National Grid does a project, they'll bring their own signs in and pop them up. So once they start the project to full in, I'm sure they're going to have them. And if they don't, we'll make sure we require them to have them at each end of the street as an extra warning.
Is there, can we, you know, this just came to me, and I don't know if it's even possible, but just is there any way we can populate the website, you know, in those little blocks that kind of are in the center? And I still think there's election information, and well, maybe it's the upcoming election, which is very important as well. But, you know, if that's a place where we can just plan to drop any known larger, you know, than usual anticipated road work.
Sure.
You know, that way we can at least, I mean, it's impossible to necessarily now, given the framework of our website, to put, you know, minute by minute updates, like if the beach is closing. But for projects that we know, you know, it's just a ongoing road work this week in Cohasset, that kind of thing might be very helpful. Carrie, turning over selectman comment, you get the last word.
I absolutely subscribe to the narrative that more unites us than divides us. But on that note, I also think that we need to be willing to get a little bit out of our comfort zone this year with the goals that we have set, and really think about ways in which there are issues going on in our town that a lot of us continue to sweep under the rug. I think that this town is amazing. I think that there are some really good people in this town, but there also are some really big problems that we have in this town. And I think that we shouldn't be afraid to talk about that and figure out ways to make it better. And, you know, for example, I really want to encourage everyone to keep supporting our local businesses and our local restaurants and our local coffee shops and our local retail establishments. A couple of those establishments have faced some pretty big hatred lately from certain residents of the South Shore for choosing to use their First Amendment rights of displaying signs and, you know, Black Lives Matter signs. And, you know, they're facing a lot of pushback from certain residents. And you know, yes, I do believe that more unites us than divides us, but we have some real problems happening in this town. And I think that it's naive to not be willing to admit that. So keep supporting our local businesses. I'm really excited about our goals this year. I think that there's a lot of potential to really address some much needed issues in the town, and stay safe. And as Dr. Schubert always reminds me, wear your mask.
And wash your hands. Okay. So we have 3 sets of minutes. There you go. Minutes from 6:23, 7:14, and 7:21. Anyone want to move approval of them individually or collectively?
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
as clerk, reluctant clerk, I want to say reluctant with a capital R clerk. On the July 14th minutes, there's some things in there that I'm going to suggest to Tracy that she might want to modify, but the other
Okay.
2 minutes are fine.
Okay, great. We'll hold off on those, and 6:23 and 7:21. We can, somebody wants to move those, approval of those.
I move
So
that we
moved.
approve.
Okay. Carrie, you want to give a second?
Second.
You can
Okay.
have first, Carrie.
No,
You
Jack,
can
Jack,
have clerk
I-
too. Yeah,
Jack.
what clerk?
As our clerk,
Let's see what Tracy puts in the minutes. Okay, roll call on those 2 sets of minutes, beginning with Jack.
Jack Creighton, aye.
Corey Evans, aye.
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Paul Schubert, aye.
Harry Thompson, aye.
Okay, I have no topics not reasonably anticipated within 48 hours. I will call
Motion to
for,
adjourn.
There's
there a
a flyover over the International Space Station in about 5 minutes, so
oh, good, quick,
Motion to
let's get out of here.
adjourn.
All right, we got a motion
Second.
and a second. All right, Jack,
Jack Creighton, aye.
Corey Evans, aye.
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Paul Schubert, aye.
Harry Thompson, aye.
All right, thank you all. Stay safe. Go see the space
All right.
station.
Good
Bye.
night.
Good deal. See y'all later.
Paul, I love what a geek you are.